You don't need to know who created Astro Boy to enjoy anime or manga, but try to imagine animation without Walt Disney or comics without Stan Lee. Osamu Tezuka had a similar impact for anime and manga, yet the man responsible for taking Japanese comics from a throwaway to a global industry is completely unknown outside of his own country. Tezuka's career spanned from 1946 to 1989, his contributions to post-war manga and Japan's animation industry garnering him titles like Walt Disney of Japan and God of Manga. Through his longevity, he would influence many young readers who would go on to be creators themselves, the likes of Hayao Miyazaki, co-founder of Studio Ghibli, Yoshiyuki Tomino, creator of Gundam, Katsuhiro Otomo, creator of Akira, and many, many more. At the start of this video making process, I tasked myself with gathering as many manga, officially translated or not, so that I could better understand his career. The number I landed on was... In his 5 decades as a mangaka, Tezuka did not release 63, but instead 700 volumes of manga. The sheer enormity of this number bringing with it one key issue: finding all of it. Fortunately, in 1977, Kodansha, a Japanese publishing company, proposed an idea. What if we collected all of it? Unfortunately unable to collect all of it, Kodansha published a measly 400 volumes of Tezuka's manga. The Osamu Tezuka Complete Manga Works collection is the most comprehensive compilation of Tezuka's works that exists today. It is widely available in Japan, but only a small selection of these have been translated for international audiences. Of these manga, I've found 63. While not a complete selection of all of his works available internationally, I would like to think that it is quite close to that number. I have distilled the bulk of my thoughts into this video, which I have further split into 5 sections, each section of this video corresponding to a decade of Tezuka's career. Included alongside each section is a brief history on Tezuka's life at the time. These serve as much needed context to appreciate the works to come. I appreciate the length of this video, and so each section has been designed to be self-contained, and at the end of each section should act as a natural stopping point. Though if you are brave enough to watch all of this in one sitting, you will have my personal respect. Without further ado, we begin this video 96 years ago on November 3rd, 1928, with the birth of the father of manga. Osamu Tezuka was born in Toyonaka, Osaka Prefecture, as the first child of Yutaka Tezuka and Fumiko Tezuka. He was born into a very progressive family for their time. His father was a keen photographer and fan of cinema. The Tezukas would often go to see the likes of Disney and the Fleischer brothers in theatres. This would have a lasting impact on Tezuka, who would remain a lifelong Disney fan, even having the chance to meet Walt Disney, but that is a story for another decade. Tezuka's parents fostered his imagination, leaving paper and pencil by his bedside at night. He was so prolific that his mother was often forced to erase and reuse many of his notebooks just to keep up with the demand. This was the least surprising thing that I found out in making this video. In 1933, the Tezuka family, now numbering 5, would move to Takarazuka, the current location of the Tezuka Museum. Before it was home to this museum, it was home to the famous Takarazuka Revue, a theatre group known for their plays performed by an all-female cast. Tezuka's mother, Fumiko, loved storytelling. As a result, his mother would take him to the revue even before he was old enough to go to school. Early exposure to the theatre left a lasting impression on Tezuka. The flamboyant costuming and set design had a significant influence on Tezuka's later works, particularly those aimed at young girls. They also influenced how he would use characters in his manga. Unlike most mangaka today, Tezuka reused characters in multiple works, allowing them to play the roles of actors leading lives completely removed from their roles in previous works. This was known as the star system. I won't go into too much detail here. It is a very extensive system, including fictional rates of pay for almost all of its actors, but I will mention a few characters to keep an eye on. Hige Oyaji, or as I will refer to him for the rest of this video, Mr. Mustachio, is Tezuka's earliest and longest serving star, first seen in an amateur Tezuka manga drew while still in school. Kenichi Shikishima is a prominent character in Tezuka's early career. He's a good-natured young boy embodying the morality of Tezuka's earlier works. Rock Holmes, boy detective, is a dark counterpart. His shift from the good-natured roles in Tezuka's early career to pure evil in Tezuka's later years coincide with a similar shift that occurred in the types of manga that Tezuka told. The hopeful stories of the 40s, 50s aimed at children gave way to the more cynical works aimed at adults in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. In the early 1930s though, the young boy's life was a peaceful one. He lived in a home surrounded by nature with a supportive family. This tranquility, though, would only last a few more years. In 1935, Tezuka began elementary school. He was a small, skinny boy with wavy hair, unusual enough at the time to make him stand out. As a result, he was often bullied in elementary school. Tezuka was, however, very resilient and would eventually use his skills in drawing to win back the favor of his classmates. In 1937, Japan went to war against China. This brought with it a number of changes. Japan's government began to crack down on all art that didn't support the war effort. This, in combination with a shortage of raw materials and people, led to entertainment becoming increasingly censored and hard to get hold of. In 1938, with the war intensifying, Japan's government passed regulation banning akahon manga. These were cheaply manufactured manga, identifiable by their red covers. They were the most affordable form of manga at the time. As a result of the ban, manga began to disappear from children's magazines. In 1939, the War to End All Wars sequel began, and Tezuka had just entered the 5th grade. He'd now began to wear glasses, growing ever closer to the man that we would recognize today. During this time, he also grew a fascination with insects, in particular ground beetles named osamushi in Japanese. Tezuka thought that with its long neck, it looked rather similar to himself. Inspired by this, he added the corresponding Japanese character to his name, forming his pen name Osamushi. This pen name would have significant ramifications for the Japanese animation industry. In the 1960s, when Tezuka looked to found his own anime studio, the same studio that would make Japan's first TV anime, Astro Boy, he landed on the name Mushi Productions. 19 years before this, none of that almost happened when Tezuka almost lost his ability to draw. 5 years into World War II, Tezuka was sent to Ichiriyama Health Training Center. This was a facility to train teenagers who were smaller and weaker than average. They were given a strenuous exercise regime to toughen them up in preparation for military service. Soon after he joined, Tezuka was allowed to leave again. He picked up an illness during his time at Ichiriyama, which caused his arms to become so swollen that he was sent home to avoid passing it to other children. While at the hospital, a doctor said that if they presented any later, both of his arms would have had to be amputated. This incident motivated Tezuka and instilled in him a burning desire to chase his dreams and become a doctor. Manga as a profession was still far from his mind at this point. Tezuka instead decided to follow in the footsteps of his great-grandfather Ryoin Tezuka, Japan's first military doctor. But we'll talk a bit more about him in the 80s section where we discuss the semi-biographical work. In 1945, the war would reach its climax. The emphasis at this point was on winning and remaining absolutely loyal. This meant that manga, which were seen as a waste of time in the past, were now seen as a dangerous activity. 16-year-old Tezuka, despite still being in high school, found himself drafted into full-time service at a military factory. Here he would struggle greatly to maintain his hobby of drawing manga. His supervisors, who are of a military background, would beat him up if they caught him drawing or reading manga. He found a safe place for his works in the privacy of the toilet cubicles, leaving some manga for his workmates to read. His fellow workers perhaps enjoyed his work a little bit too much, with Tezuka later recalling that some of his pages were used as toilet paper. During spring of that year, while struggling to maintain his hobby at the factory, Tezuka would witness firsthand the cruelty that humanity is capable of. Present for the firebombing of Osaka, he never forgot mankind's capacity for destruction and violence, nor the weight of human suffering. This encounter hardened his anti-war sentiments, shaping the many stories that he would go on to write in the future. From his adult works like Message to Adolf that deal with the events of World War II directly, to his children's work like Jungle Emperor that center on the inability of two groups to understand each other. With the fear of being drafted into the war rising, Tezuka made haste to start medical school that summer. The same summer that the Japanese emperor would announce that the end of the war marked the beginning of great change in Japan, and with that came hope for new beginnings. The following year, Tezuka would release his first professional manga. His neighbor, who worked for the local newspaper, the Mainichi Shogakusei Shimbun, introduced Tezuka to one of its editors. Impressing the editor, the young artist received a job drawing a comic strip in his local newspaper. Tezuka's introduction into the manga industry was through the medium's most dominant format at the time, gag manga. It follows the daily life of the titular preschooler Machan. As a Yonkomo manga released for a daily newspaper serial, it follows a relatively basic structure. The first panel establishes a scene, the second panel creates conflict, the third panel presents a solution, the fourth panel results in an unexpected outcome. Although a simple work, I found its emphasis on childhood innocence made for amusing stories. In its light-hearted brevity, Ma-chan depicts the life of children after the war. In such a difficult time as post-war Japan, light-hearted stories like these were exactly what people needed to bring up their spirits. Tezuka's early success was built on writing for children, and in Ma-chan, he had succeeded in creating a character who resonated with post-war children. Following its serialization, Tezuka noted dolls and Ma-chan being sold at toy stores in his local area, a testament to the little toddler's popularity. However, a much bigger break was just around the corner. Later that same year, Tezuka would receive an offer to work on a story developed by an established manga artist in Osaka, Shichima Sakai. Sakai suggested Tezuka should draw a manga based on the story that he had written. Be released the following year, and neither Sakai nor Tezuka could have predicted how big it would become. This was Kenichi's first role as leading man. He plays an orphan, Pete, who is seeking the help of a friend of his late father. In Pete, we see the blueprint for many of Tezuka's main characters going forwards. Children with absent parents are a very common theme in Tezuka's work, likely inspired by the many kids in that same position post-war. Pete's father's friend, the captain, agrees to help him sail to an island marked on a treasure map. What should be an easy journey is complicated when their map is stolen by pirates, and the two must make their way to the island on their own. Reading this manga, and perhaps even listening to this description, it's not immediately clear what makes this manga so remarkable. Fortunately, there are a few theories on what exactly made this stand out. The most commonly cited reason is that it introduced cinematic techniques such as pans and close-ups into manga, making New Treasure Island more dynamic than its contemporaries. The second theory comes from the head archivist of Tezuka Productions at the time of the Kodansha Complete Collection's release. In his opinion, what separated this manga from what came before it was its speed. Pre-war manga were very slow to read. New Treasure Island, with its limited dialogue and focus on movement, was far quicker. One thing was clear to me from both theories. Tezuka's diverse exposure to art as a child culminated in a distinct visual style that made for a refreshing reading experience for readers at the time. This resulted in New Treasure Island cementing itself as a success, selling more than 400,000 copies, an unheard of number of sales in post-war Japan. Keiji Nakazawa, best known for his manga expressing the horrors of the atomic bomb, recalled being riveted by New Treasure Island and the ruins of Hiroshima following the war. Treasure Island was one of Tezuka's first ventures into a new manga format rarely used at the time. It wasn't until this next work that he would really take long-form narrative storytelling seriously. Its focus was made especially clear in its opening remarks. Was to be his most ambitious project yet. Gunshots gathered the attention of Private Hire Mr. Mustachio, prompting an investigation into the mysterious circumstances around a man's murder. The key to solving this mystery, 7 powerful gems. Mustachio's investigation finds him in opposition to the secret society will stop at nothing, including murder, to gain the gems' power. In the final volume of this series, we witness the power of these stones firsthand as an expeditionary team all depart for the planet Mamango. It's on this planet that the series named Lost World is made apparent. Mamango is revealed to be a long-lost chunk of Earth from millions of years ago. The crew's time on this planet is filled with wonder at the sights that they see, but also betrayal as crew members seek to make use of this opportunity for their own gain. Lost World mimics a novel in its winding narrative, spanning multiple genres, locations, and characters, and was the beginning of what made Tezuka so special at the time. It was defined by his lengthy sequential narrative. Although a 20-chapter sequential story seems rather brief today, in a post-war manga market dominated by episodic gag manga, it was truly revolutionary. Lost World, however, lacks the polish that would be present in Tezuka's later works. This manifests itself in a plot that is perhaps too ambitious, and for me, was at times quite hard to follow. Whatever difficulties I found reading this in 2024 were not shared by its audience in 1948. Lost World, similarly to New Treasure Island, sold close to 400,000 units, another major success under the young mangaka's belt. The manga that follows was a little less expansive, but a lot more focused. At the time of this work's release, westerns were very popular in Japan, and this inspired the first western that I would read for this video. A small mountain village sits on the border between Arizona and New Mexico. Its people live in fear. The village is occupied by demons. Just outside are hostile Native Americans. Following an attack on the sheriff, the village strikes back at the natives. Failing their attack, a young boy is left behind with the natives. It's here that is revealed who the demons occupying the village really are. Rather than the Native Americans, it turns out to be the sheriff and the mayor conspiring to steal from the villagers. Angel Gunfighter is a story about not being deceived by appearances. From the townsfolk's preconceptions of the natives to Monster's lover Anna, an adept gunslinger forced to cross-dress as a male to be taken seriously. Despite the popularity of westerns, Angel Gunfighter was nowhere near as well received as its predecessors, but it does still have a legacy of its own. Monster's kissing scene with Anna is said to be the first kissing scene in a manga and resulted in the still young Tezuka being heavily criticized at the time. The final work that we're going to look at in this 1940s section is the second entry into one of Tezuka's most important trilogies. This trilogy, unofficially created by Tezuka's fans, shows the early beginnings of what would become Tezuka's most prolific and identifiable genre. This is especially the case for a work that would greatly influence Astro Boy. World-renowned scientist Dr. Lawton has just made a breakthrough on his research into artificial cells. Following this, a suspicious man tasked Dr. Lawton with the creation of an artificial being. After noticing their plan to exploit his creation, Dr. Lawton fakes his death, taking the newly created Michi with him. Despite trying his hardest to raise Michi as a normal child, it is continuously made clear to Michi that Michi is different from everyone else. The reason for this is only revealed much later in the story, but the weight of this reveal and the cruelty of mankind incites a great rage into Michi, resulting in a revolution to destroy humanity for good. Metropolis is a cautionary tale on man's unregulated pursuit of technological development, and despite being 75 years old, is still somewhat topical today with the discussions we're having about AI. It's a work filled with so many ideas that they couldn't all be fully explored in just one manga. Themes about robot rights that were lightly touched upon through Duke Red's exploitation of artificial beings would later be fleshed out in the likes of Astro Boy, where it became its central idea. Within Michi's loving relationship with Dr. Lawton, we can also see the early foundations of Astro's relationship with Professor Ochanomizu, but Metropolis's influence extends far past Astro Boy. One of Metropolis's lesser ideas would go on to be a defining feature of Tezuka's career. Up until now, some of you might have noticed I've been playing the pronoun game when discussing Michi. I've intentionally chose to avoid referring to Michi with gendered pronouns, instead opting for Michi's name. This isn't because Michi has no gender, but rather the exact opposite. Much like Princess Sapphire and Princess Knight, Dororo in Dororo, Rock Holmes in multiple works, and Yuki Michio in MW, Michi freely switches between genders. This idea of characters playing different genders was inspired by the all-female cast of the Takarazuka Review, who played both male and female roles. Just like Michi and their gender fluidity, this entire decade's worth of work is just the beginning of a long line of influence that would shape modern manga as we know it. Although still relatively unknown outside of Osaka, with these works Tezuka had positioned himself to become a leading figure in Japan's entertainment industry going forwards. As a reader, I found some of these works to still be a little rough around the edges, but they got me excited for what was to come. In the following decade, we shall see Tezuka go from a local celebrity to a juggernaut in Japanese pop culture. We will explore Tezuka's most iconic manga, Astro Boy, and one of my favourite manga of his catalogue, Jungle Emperor. In the summer of 1947, Tezuka would set off for Tokyo to try his luck with their major manga publishers. His talks with Kodansha were unsuccessful, however he had a few series bought by Shinseikaku to keep up with his publishing. Tezuka was used to working non-stop. Editors from various publishers were forced to travel with him to make sure that he stayed on schedule. Wherever he was, it wasn't uncommon for him to draw all night, even did so the night before he took his university medical exams. At this point in Tezuka's career, he was still juggling his priorities. Not willing to give up on a well-respected career in medicine, but also unable to deny his passions for manga. Although he continued on as usual, often drawing pages of manga during his medical classes, he did receive an important piece of advice from his mother. When Tezuka admitted to her that he preferred manga to medicine, his mother told him to do what made him happy. This piece of advice, alongside the growing success of his manga career, gave Tezuka the courage he needed to quit his medical career and to commit to manga fully. Following this, Tezuka finally moved to Tokyo. His first Tokyo home and studio was a small room above a greengrocer's, but a year later, in 1953, he moved into a recently built Tokyo apartment house. This apartment later becoming the now legendary Manga apartment. Although the first tenant, Tezuka was later followed by sports artist Hiroo Terada, comedy manga specialist Fujio Katsuka, and the pioneering female mangaka Hideko Mizuno. They were friends, but also rivals, and Tezuka was by far the most successful. When Tezuka eventually left the house, he then passed on his room to a pair of struggling mangaka, Hiroshi Fujimoto and Motoo Abiko. They were fans of Tezuka's work who had visited his family home in Osaka while they were still in high school. This pair would later become famous as the manga duo Fujiko Fujio, the creators of Doraemon. Tezuka's arrival in Tokyo cemented his commitment to manga, and Tezuka committed in the most spectacular way possible, with the 50s becoming his most prolific decade. During the 1950s, Tezuka produced almost 250 works, more than 100 being ongoing serials and magazines, more than 125 complete stories and supplements, and a dozen long book-form comics as well. Many of these works went on to be classic, one of which being, although wildly known in the West as Kimba the White Lion, Jungle Emperor opens up with another, already fully grown lion. Through a very visceral fight, this lion is shown to be powerful, noble, and magnificent, protecting the animals of the jungle from the evil humans. His death only coming through the underhanded scheme of capturing his wife. This is Kimba's father, Panja. Born following the capture of his mother, Kimba's story begins not in the jungle, but in a cruise ship bound for a zoo. Fearing her cub's life will amount to nothing, Kimba's mother forces him out to sea to make his way back to Africa alone. As a result, the early parts of Jungle Emperor are largely concerned with Kimba's journey back to Africa. This journey is not a straightforward one and results in multiple detours, one such detour being France. Here we are met by two familiar faces who adopt Kimba into their family. Kimba's new life as a domesticated house pet in his formative years give him an education in humanity and civility. These lessons will greatly shape the rest of his life when he eventually returns back to Africa. Upon his return to his homeland, it is far from the stories his mother told him. His time there is marked by conflict, both externally and internal. Externally, he's targeted by his father's successor, who wants to protect the throne for himself. Internally, he has a conflict of identity. Having spent his formative years away from the jungle, the ways of the animals in the jungle are barbaric to him. He's forced to confront the reality of the kind of animal that he is. In one such moment, the reader sees the young cub as he sees the skin pelt of his father, only then to pray to it for help. Removing the feline exterior, Jungle Emperor is really just a story about an orphan child trying to find his place in the world, and I love the conclusion that this child came to. Kimba's internal struggle comes from the fact that he does not fit with either man or animal kind. This is best symbolized in the trousers that he wears, a remnant of his domesticated life. Kimba discards these in a cathartic moment of self-acceptance. After witnessing the cruelty of man and how animals suffer, he throws down his trousers. This is not him discarding his humanity, rather him no longer running away from his animal side. Having now come of age, Kimba finally finds his purpose in life: to make animals and humans understand each other. After his ascent to the throne, Kimba uses his newfound power to teach the other animals how to speak like humans so that the two can better understand each other. From a writing perspective, it's a really seamless integration of Tezuka's anti-war sentiments developed during the war with his love of Disney works that he had held since he was a child. The specific form that it would take in Jungle Emperor, though, can first be traced back to Disney's 1942 classic, Bambi, a film that Tezuka reportedly saw over 80 times. Although he loved Bambi, Tezuka had a fundamental disagreement with it. If these animals were as sentient as the film implies, then surely they should have tried to interact with the humans rather than hiding away from them. Jungle Emperor is a young Tezuka's response to this discrepancy, but achieving understanding between humans and animals is not as simple as teaching animals to talk, and the end result is that Kimba faces many hardships throughout Jungle Emperor. Never shying away from how cruel reality can be, we see the death of Kimba's parents, the death of his wife, the loss of his child, the literal plague, but the only constant is Kimba's perseverance for his cause. It resonated deeply with me, and is something that I came to deeply admire about his character. In this pursuit, Kimba without doubt matches the image of his father that was presented in the prologue. In Jungle Emperor's single-minded focus on Kimba's journey to get man and animal kind to understand each other, Jungle Emperor ends up resembling a biography, something that you might read about a notable figure in history. It follows the entirety of Kimba's life, from birth to death, his notable impact on the world he inhabited, and the many trials and tribulations that he faced to achieve it. This style of biographical storytelling is a part of Jungle Emperor's legacy. It is a style that Tezuka would again revisit in his later works, Buddha and Ludwig B, this time swapping his fictional protagonist for a non-fictional one. Jungle Emperor was also the first of Tezuka's work that would go on to be a global success. Its 1965 anime, produced by Mushi Productions, is notable for it being Japan's first coloured TV anime. It followed on in the footsteps of its younger brother, Astro Boy, having its anime broadcast internationally in the likes of North America, Europe, and Asia. Jungle Emperor was no doubt one of Tezuka's landmark works of this decade, but was only one of many works that were released. To maintain his prolific output, Tezuka worked in multiple works at the same time. One work, released during the serialization of Jungle Emperor, was another Western. Cactus Kid follows the strongest man in the whole of the West, Mr. Cactus. The source of his incredible strength? Milk. Mr. Cactus trades Popeye's love of spinach for an appreciation of milk. Knowing Tezuka was exposed to the works of Max Fleischer as a child, I can't help but suspect that Mr. Cactus and Popeye's appreciation of non-solid food items is more than just a coincidence. In this episodic adventure story, Mr. Cactus solves all manner of troubles in the Wild West with the power of this creamy beverage. Although not a gag manga, humor is still the primary draw of this manga. As a work released between Tezuka's active serialization of both Jungle Emperor and the soon-to-be published Astro Boy, Cactus Kid's humor and nonsensical tone was a refreshing break from the demands of the aforementioned works. You get the impression while reading this that Tezuka had a lot of fun writing the story. However, this was not the case for all of his works. Having promised another manga during the serialization of Jungle Emperor, but with no work to show for it, Tezuka would be forced to experiment with his storytelling format. Originally intended as a spiritual successor to New Treasure Island, would forever be changed when a magazine in Tokyo had released a manga with an identical concept of a treasure hunt on a foreign island. Tezuka, not wanting to seem like he copied this manga, completely scrapped the idea. He now had to rework the comic, but the only thing that remained was the title, Fossil Island. Struggling to come up with one long story, Tezuka instead opted for a story with multiple shorter works. The issue is how he would tie these stories together, his solution being an anthology format held together thematically by the appearance of fossils. Three travelers, songwriter Kodansha, news reporter Rock, and the mangaka Osamu Tezuka all depart for Fossil Island. In so doing, they notice three fossil-like rocks on the island and each have dreams about the reasons for this, each dream representing a different story in this anthology. This was a format Tezuka would revisit regularly, particularly because he wrote so many one-shot stories. It was a convenient way to compile all of these stories together. All previously mentioned works so far, including Fossil Island, began serializing in 1951. This was the same year that would also bring us the final entry to Tezuka's legendary SF trilogy. On the mysterious Horseshoe Island, a new race has been born due to the mutations arising from nuclear testing. Unfortunately, when presented at the Atomic Conference, these cautions are given no time. Also, while humanity has been busy bickering and fighting against each other, they have failed to notice a cloud of toxic gas approaching the planet. The Famoon, planning an escape from the planet, have been gathering different species of animals and plants in the hopes of leaving the Earth and saving those worthy being saved. Next World is inherently anti-war, with its portrayal of war as man bickering and fighting with each other. However, these ideas are undercut by the convoluted conflict between the nations of Japan, Star, and Iran. Next World is also complicated by its use of its enormous ensemble cast. Next World features more than 20 characters of Tezuka's star system, some of which you'll recognize are Higeo Yaji as the detective, Kenichi Kishima as his nephew, and Rock Holmes, the son of a newspaper reporter. Next World was meant to be the pinnacle of the ambition presented by Tezuka's story manga, however the execution was lacking. Although an interesting setup, Next World's narrative was hard to follow, even more so than Lost World, and I came away from this manga disliking the experience of reading it. As the final work of the legendary SF trilogy, Next World was disappointing and was indicative of a larger issue I was facing while reading Tezuka's bibliography. Partly due to Tezuka still finding his feet as a mangaka, partly due to the sheer volume of output, these works were very different in style, narrative, and quality. Not every one of these works played a significant role in Tezuka's chronology, and even those that did were not guaranteed to be as legendary as the mythos might lead you to believe. In this next segment, within a segment, I want to take some time to address some of these works from this decade that I didn't love, some that I didn't finish, and others that I didn't have much to say about. One of Tezuka's most inconsistent works, Age of Adventure, really made me empathize with the struggle of being a mangaka. This work came about when the owner of the Akita publishing company requested a work for their publication. Despite working on both Astro Boy and Jungle Emperor, Tezuka took the job. Lacking the time to come up with any new ideas, he ended up reusing an old work from his high school days. This new version was only meant to focus on the exploration of the Wild West, but due to Akita Publishing Company's strong interest to have the series be continued, a lot of unplanned elements were poorly integrated. In his afterword, Tezuka would remark that, "I have never done a work or a series as poorly as this one." Tongara Valley tells the story of a valley filled with animals that has ceased to exist. It is told from the perspective of Jiro, a young squirrel, and the young girl Sana, who befriends the animals of the valley. As another animal-themed work embodies Tezuka's love for Disney. Earth War follows a young boy who joins an anti-war group. Its anti-war themes are however undercut by an inability to commit to the cruelty of humanity. The war in this manga being the result of aliens' manipulation rather than any fault of man. Golden Trunk was an early taster of a manga format that would greatly shape the second half of Tezuka's career. One night at a hotel, a man appears holding a golden suitcase. The man disappears, leaving the suitcase behind him. Passing from owner to owner, the suitcase drives each insane. The story follows a news reporter and his family who try to get to the bottom of this mysterious suitcase. This manga's use of art with heavy shading and its inclusion of a darker tone draw comparisons to the still young Gekiga movement. Gekiga was to manga what the graphic novel movement was to comics. It was a movement seeking to challenge the perception that manga was for kids. It would eventually overthrow Tezuka's whimsical manga style as the dominant form of manga, but not for another decade. At the time of this work's release, Gekiga was a niche underground movement, unaware of its latent potential. Castle of the Dawn is set in a warring period of Japanese history where anyone can be your enemy. Set in 1594, Lord Hideyoshi Toyotomi instructs his vassal, Lord Matsunoki, to construct a new castle to keep an eye on his main rival. Following the realization that the construction of this castle will lead to the death of countless innocents, Midorimaru defects from his father's side. Betrayal is a recurring motif in this work, and Tezuka uses it to highlight the paranoia brought on by this period in history. This idea would be later revisited in Dororo through Lord Daigo, a man who sacrificed his son for fear of losing his power. All of these aforementioned works have value of their own, if only because the artistic process is iterative. They all include ideas that Tezuka would revisit and improve upon later on in his works. On reflection, it is very fascinating to see how these works laid the building blocks for those later works, but I would hesitate to recommend them as your introduction to any of Tezuka's works. By highlighting as many works as I have done, my hope is that the prospective Tezuka-phile can use this information to make an informed decision on where to begin their journey. Concluding that aside, we can move on to Tezuka's most iconic work, and the work that I assumed people clicked on this video to watch, Mighty Atom, or as it would later be known in the West as. Selling over 100 million copies, Astro Boy is one of only 22 manga to have achieved this and is 16 years older than the next to do so. Its release marked a drastic shift in Tezuka's career as a mangaka and in the Japanese entertainment landscape. And my biggest surprise is that it came so soon in his career. After all, he was only 6 years into his 5-decade spanning career. Astro Boy's origins can be traced back to the Tezuka's 1951 manga, Ambassador Atom. A spaceship arrives on Earth carrying humans identical to those already on the planet. Although initially welcoming, dwindling resources result in conflict. Astro plays the role of a supporting character mediating between the two races. Although not the main character, this role was taken by Kenichi, fans of Ambassador Atom found the boy robot more interesting than its main character, and Tezuka, quick to make use of his star system, gave the debutante the leading role in his own comic. In an attempt to reconcile with the sudden death of his son Tobio, Dr. Tenma creates a robot in his likeness. As the pinnacle of human science, this robot is granted 7 special powers. The ability to fly, speak 60 different languages, sense whether people are good or bad, superhuman hearing, uses eyes as searchlights, strength equal to 100,000 horsepower, and machine guns in his rear end.
I got machine guns in my butt?
Although created as a substitute, the realization that this robot does not grow and cannot age shatters any illusion that this is his son. No matter how much he tries, he cannot replace Tobio, and so he discards his creation to a robot circus. What awaits him is a life of servitude and exploitation for the amusement of humans, but fortunately he is noticed by another roboticist, Dr. Ochinomizu, who removes the boy from his life, raising him like a son, and naming him Astro. Astro Boy's significance as a science fiction work is made readily apparent while reading it. Its expository scenes explaining basic science fiction concepts such as time machines reveal this. At the time of its release, science fiction was still a young genre, and ideas of robots, space, and technology seemed nonsensical. At the beginning of its serialization, no artificial satellite existed, no one knew who Gagarin was, and even TV was nothing more than a dream. Astro Boy was many Japanese people's introduction into the power of technology and the fantasy of science fiction. It is my personal opinion that science fiction is the most important genre in anime and manga. Excluding Astro Boy, the likes of Gundam exist as one of the largest media franchises in the world. Akira was largely responsible for popularizing anime outside of the West in the 80s and 90s. Ghost in the Shell is notable for its contribution to the cyberpunk genre and its influence on the Matrix creators, the Wachowskis. And Evangelion cannot be understated for its long-standing impact on otaku culture as a whole. Each of these works have their own legacy, and yet it was Astro Boy who introduced a basic concept like time machines to the Japanese public. Astro Boy is not just an important manga, but is also a foundational science fiction work. Through Astro's use of atomic-powered exploits, Astro Boy almost single-handedly transformed the terrifying force of atomic power into something useful and progressive, helping the people of Japan to move on from the damage done during the Second World War by getting them to embrace modern technology and look to the future with hope. Astro was Japan's very first superhero, and like many superhero comics, Astro Boy is told through a series of episodic ones, some being slice of life, but the majority being action-oriented, whereby the lightly clothed superhero deals with all manner of threat that affect humans or robots. One notable example of such a story is The World's Strongest Robot, whereby 7 of the world's strongest robots, Astro included, are being slowly killed off by another, newer robot. This was to be imagined 50 years later as the manga Pluto by Naoki Urasawa. The best of these stories concerns what it's like to live as a robot in the distant future of robots are legally recognized as sentient life forms, going so far as to group themselves into families, although share no blood relation. Despite this classification, prejudice and bigotry are still rampant and act as fuel for conflict. Astro Boy's role as a superhero inevitably puts him in the middle of this. As a public figure, it also means that whatever actions he does, whether that be for the benefit of humans or robots, will inevitably affect the public's perceptions of robots as a whole. In one of the more literal examples of this, a politician with a hatred for robots takes advantage of Astro's fight against a robot criminal to pass a law removing robots' consciousness. Astro Boy's 23 volumes are rich with interesting commentary on human-robot relations, building on the human-robot conflict first seen in Metropolis. If every story maintained this quality and thoughtfulness, it would no doubt have ended up as one of my favourite works for this video. However, the biggest thing hindering Astro Boy was its repetition. Astro's regular victories against foreign foes and robot races were no doubt a comforting one to defeated Japan, but their regular appearance and lack of innovation became exceptionally draining over the course of its 23 volumes. Astro Boy exists as one of the few works that can lay claim to the title of manga canon. Its arrival immediately announced the transition of manga into the modern era. It was immensely popular with its Japanese audience, with a lengthy run from 1952 to 1968. It received the earliest known live-action manga adaptation in the 1959 Mighty Atom series and Japan's first TV anime in 1963. As the first TV anime in Japan, whatever your favourite TV anime is, owes its inception, at least in some part, to Astro Boy. Not content with local success either, Astro Boy then went global. Its 1963 anime was one of the first anime to be exported abroad and was immensely successful, particularly in the US. With Astro Boy's globalization also came international renown for Tezuka. In January 1965, Tezuka received a letter from an American film director, Stanley Kubrick, who, having watched Astro Boy, wanted to invite Tezuka to be the art director of his next movie, eventually releasing in 1968. Although flattered by Kubrick's invitation, Tezuka could not afford to leave his studio for a year to live in England, so he had to turn down the offer. Tezuka, despite now being a household name, carried on working like normal. During Astro Boy's 16-year serialization, Tezuka continued drawing hundreds of volumes of manga, all the while still serializing his most iconic work. One such work serialized during this time of Astro Boy was a work often credited as being the first shoujo manga. It raises a prince. Princess Sapphire's journey consists of her trying to maintain appearances as a prince while trying to navigate her own feelings about whether she was a boy or a girl. It would greatly revolutionize manga aimed at young girls and set in place a lot of common narrative conventions still in place today. Princess Knight was originally released in 1953, but was later remade in 1963, this remake being the far more influential version and more well known. As a result, we shall be coming back to look at this work in the 60s section. Continuing our theme of a work penned at the same time as Astro Boy is the following work. Whereas Princess Knight was initially released on January 1953, 1 year into Astro Boy's serialization, It was released on May 1953, 5 months into Princess Knight's serialization, alongside being 1 year into Astro Boy's serialization. It is the final Western work in this video. As one of 4 Western works so far, Western should be considered as an important genre in Tezuka's chronology. However, they would become forgotten over time as compared to more notable genres like science fiction, despite, in my opinion, being more enjoyable. This Western depicts the final confrontation between Sheriff, Lemon Kid, and criminal Melon Kid, his former mentor. This confrontation is given weight by a lengthy flashback that interrupts the confrontation. It is the centerpiece of the manga and takes up the majority of its page count. Until now, Tezuka's work has been known for its complex, winding narratives. Contrastingly, Lemon Kid is an exercise in efficiency brought on by an extremely tight deadline. The end result was what Tezuka described as careless mistakes. For example, the story's focus on 2 protagonists with similar names was a complete accident. Although titled Lemon Kid, Tezuka had accidentally written Melon Kid on the first page, forcing him to write a story of 2 protagonists with similar names. Tezuka was forced to work through the night with no sleep just to meet this deadline. On the 3rd day, he had his editor screaming at him that he was running behind, and so he devised a solution that would require him to reuse earlier pages to finish his work on time. This plan was not without pushback. Tezuka's editor complained that they could not afford to pay him to reuse panels that he's not put pen to paper on. As a result, for the reused pages in the second half of Lemon Kid, Tezuka edited slightly so as to put pen to paper. Lemon Kid's tumultuous development speaks volumes on Tezuka's mindset of finishing a story at any cost. The greatest compliment I can give to this work is, in a work Tezuka described as not having anything respectable, I found it to be thoroughly engaging. The final work of this decade is a confessional piece by Tezuka featuring many similarities to his own life and unknowingly foreshadowing his own future. Main character Miyamoto Musashi leaves his life in Osaka behind to move to Tokyo and chase his dream of making a manga movie. Despite showing great technical ability, Musashi is rejected by his dream job as his work lacks life. Not deterred by this, he pursues a career in manga as a temporary stopgap. The film Lives On was intended to inspire the youth into making manga movies. A lot of attention was spent educating the reader about the anime and manga industry in detailed exposition scenes. Musashi, being a newbie to the big Tokyo industry, is the perfect individual to introduce Tezuka's young audience to the inner workings of the industry. It was both inspiring and educational. We see the struggles an inexperienced Musashi went through having to rework his art to fit the demands of the editors. We witness the realities of being a mangaka whereby magazine politics forces someone to draw against their will. For Musashi, achieving his dream is presented as a difficult task. Fortunately, Musashi Miyamoto finds a kindred spirit in friend and soon-to-be rival Sasaki Kojiro. Sasaki serves as a parallel to Musashi. Both are manga artists trying to make manga movies, but the way they go about it is completely different. Sasaki attempts to make a manga movie all on his own, whereas an unfortunate accident causes Musashi to slowly lose his eyesight, forcing him to take on a collaborative approach. The manga ends in a final fight of sort, wherein a screening of both film premieres occurs. Musashi's film, created through collaboration, is met with resounding victory as the theatre echoes with applause. Knowing a little bit of context of Tezuka's life, the film Lives On now takes on a semi-autobiographical feel. Tezuka, like Musashi, was a boy from Osaka trying to break into the already established Tokyo industry. He began as a mangaka but never lost his childhood passion for animation. And around the time of this work's release, Tezuka had become involved in Toei Animation's production of Sayuki, a retelling of the Journey to the West story. Tezuka, who was serializing his own retelling of Journey to the West, Son Goku the Monkey King, was the perfect candidate to garner this film publicity. Although not mentioned in this decade, Son Goku the Monkey King is at least as important a work in this decade as Jungle Emperor, Astro Boy, and Princess Knight. It was serialized from 1953 to 1959, but is an example of a Tezuka work whose popularity did not translate over to international audiences. I was unable to find any translations of it of any sort. For Toei's rendition of Journey to the West story though, Tezuka was named as director. He would later recount that he barely spent any time in the studio, only being used for publicity photos. Sayuki released in 1960, while the film Lives On released in 1958. The close proximity of these two events revealed to me a burning passion in Tezuka to make his own animated works, something that he would achieve in the following decade with the creation of Mushi Productions. The years between World War II and the 1950s created a perfect climate for Tezuka to establish his career. Tezuka publishing long stories on serious themes revolutionized the medium, earning him a reputation that allowed him to then take advantage of the new post-war expansion of these magazines that was occurring in Tokyo. What allowed him to sustain his place at the top of these monthly magazines though, was through his ability to generate new stories at a rapid rate. To maintain this output though, Tezuka came up with a bunch of innovative solutions. Even when Tezuka had moved out of the manga apartment, he still stayed in contact with his roommates. This unintentionally provided a solution for Tezuka's ever-growing workload. Tezuka began employing residents of the manga apartment as his assistants. As a result, he was the first Japanese manga artist to use assistants, which is now a common practice. This posed one problem though. How does Tezuka keep his style consistent when giving his assistants work to do? Tezuka's solution to this was to give his assistants references to work from. He had already set out some basic instructions in a how to draw manga book that he had earlier published. He then refined his work for professional use. This included diagrams of line styles and instructions on how to render and shade in backgrounds and effects. This combination of skilled assistants and precise instructions allowed Tezuka to be more productive. Eventually his assistants would then move on and set up their own studios. These methods that he had then taught them ended up spreading throughout the early manga industry, becoming the industry standard. In 1954, government tax returns showed that Tezuka had made 2.17 million yen, making him the highest earning artist in the Kansai region. Despite this, most of his earnings were being sent back home to build up the funds for his dreams of an animation studio. In the following decade of this video, we shall examine the iconic works Princess Knight and Dororo. In it we shall see also the rise of Tezuka's animation career with his animation studio, Mushi Productions, as well as the eventual downfall of his manga career through the rise of the Gekiga movement. At the start of the 60s, Tezuka was still one of Japan's highest earning artists. In 1960 he topped the income list again, earning more than 9 million yen, which adjusted for inflation is around $200,000 today. Tezuka would make use of this wealth to build a spacious modern family home in Tokyo's Nerima district. Newly married, this home would be where his son Makoto and his two daughters Rumiko and Chiko were born. Adjoining this house was a studio where Tezuka and his team would work on his comics. Following the birth of his son Makoto, this was extended to include another studio for Tezuka's new animation company. Even more so than any other decade, the 60s was a time of change. In 1959, the first weekly manga magazines, Weekly Shonen Magazine and Weekly Shonen Sunday, began. Still a major force at this time, Tezuka was no longer at the front line of manga innovation. As his readers began to outgrow his work, so too did the new generation become similarly disinterested. This new generation of manga readers sought something different. This void was filled with a new realistic and gritty style of manga, its young pioneers distinguishing themselves from the childish manga of old with the name Gekiga. As these works grew in popularity, Tezuka's works declined. Despite having come into his own as an artist, Tezuka was repeatedly struggling to create stories that gripped the youth of this new generation. Producing flop after flop, at least from a readership perspective, Tezuka was now at his lowest period as a mangaka, despite being at the height of fame. The narrative of this decade then being Tezuka attempting to maintain relevance in changing times. Following an altercation at a labour camp, an Ainu family are forced on the run. At the same time, a tiger also escapes captivity. The two groups make unlikely allies, but this escape is unsuccessful, with only the baby Kotan and the tiger Dan managing to escape. Thus begins a symbiotic relationship whereby the tiger protects the boy and the boy gives him companionship. In recognizing this relationship, an elderly Ainu man tasks the pair with finding the Ainu treasure and granting salvation to the Ainu people. This search raises several issues, the worst being how it affects Dan and Kotan's relationship. Although a story featuring an animal protagonist like the likes of Jungle Emperor, Brave Dan was received very poorly. From the beginning of its serialization, it was met with disapproval from its readers. Tezuka Never the Fetus, though, made several more attempts to win over the favour of his readers. A humble bookbinder is killed after sheltering a man on the run. To get revenge on the men who killed his father, Kyujiro Fukakusa intends to join the Shinsengumi. Shinsengumi is the story of Kyujiro's journey for revenge, as well as the organisation that enables him to achieve it. The Shinsengumi were a small elite force of swordsmen commissioned by Japan's military government in 1863. Tezuka's reimagining of the Shinsengumi, though, were particularly morally ambiguous. Through Kyujiro's eyes we get to witness the importance that they place on Bushido. However, this is to be later contrasted by the members of the Shinsengumi burning down the homes of innocent civilians. Chujiro's time at this organization is filled with conflict from his peers, teachers, adversaries, but also learning. Similarly, careful attention is spent on educating the readers in the world of Shinsengumi. Despite being released 61 years ago, Shinsengumi felt relatively modern, reminding me a lot of Demon Slayer. The death of the protagonist's family, the hunt for revenge, joining an organization to gain the strength necessary to enact this revenge, and an entrance exam required to join said organization. One thing that did differ from Demon Slayer to Shinsengumi was their length. Demon Slayer running for 201 chapters while Shinsengumi ran for a measly 5. Tezuka had originally planned for the story to be much longer than it was. As a full historical work, Tezuka had wanted to cover more actual historical events, mainly the execution of Isami Kondo and the Battle of Goryokaku. However, unlike Demon Slayer, Shinsengumi was received again very poorly, resulting in an exceedingly brief serialization. The parallels between Demon Slayer and Shinsengumi are interesting, not because one inspired the other, but because stories so similar could be received so differently in a mere 6 decades. The 60s was an odd decade for me as a reader. Reading Tezuka's afterwards, there was a feeling of dissonance between my own feelings of enjoyment and Tezuka's feelings of how he felt on his works. As a reader, this decade felt like Tezuka was beginning to come into his own, no longer shackled by his Disney influences. Tezuka's own unique art style began to flourish. Works going forwards all featured striking imagery and creative paneling, two things that I felt were lacking in the past decade. However, Tezuka referred to this period negatively, unable to grasp what his readers wanted to read. In addition to missing deadlines, Tezuka was at a point in his career where he was not favoured for serialization. Brave Dan and Shinsengumi were just the beginning of many unsuccessful works to come, a sharp contrast to the decade that just came. The only positive from this period was that Tezuka would finally realise his ambition of creating his own animated works. 2 years before Shinsengumi's release, Mushi Production was founded. Founded in June 1961, the studio wouldn't be completed until April of 1962, the same year that Japan's first TV anime would be released. Otogi Manga Calendar, produced by Otogi Productions and directed by Yuichi Yokoyama, was the first TV animation to air on Japanese television. At this point in time, TV animation in Japan was largely dominated by US imports. It, however, did not make as big a splash as Japan's second TV animation. The newly built Mushi Productions first began by developing 2 theatrical short films, Stories of a Street Corner and Mail. This was followed by a pilot of Astro Boy. When Mushi Production developed this pilot, the Astro Boy comic was selling very well, and even its live-action TV show was quite successful. Tezuka, however, felt that his manga could be done better in animation, but creating a full TV serial posed an issue. When Tezuka founded Mushi Productions, as a small independent studio, the only viable products to produce were basic animations for television commercials. Producing fully animated works for a television schedule simply wasn't profitable. For Japanese animation to exceed, it would have to compete with other programs on price. So Tezuka and his team decided to adapt techniques seen in American TV cartoons, like the Flintstones. Hanna-Barbera and other similar studios had showed it was possible to create works that audiences enjoyed using limited animation. Full animation in 24 frames, such as those seen in Disney films, were particularly expensive. Limited animation with 12 or even 8 frames per second was far more feasible for TV animation. This enabled studios to produce works faster, which made weekly series possible. As a result, Tezuka adopted this strategy as well as introducing his own ones. Mushi Productions incorporated a bank system whereby they would reuse cells from older productions to produce the Astro Boy anime at rapid rates and at dirt cheap prices. On January 1st, 1963, Astro Boy would premiere on Japanese television to great acclaim. With the success of Astro Boy, Mushi Productions set the standard for practice for TV anime, much of which is still being used today. As a result, it's not a far-fetched statement to say that Osamu Tezuka is largely responsible for the limited animation style associated with anime today. As with his manga debut, Tezuka was also largely influential with his anime debut, inspiring many others to follow in his footsteps. When Mushi Productions first released Astro Boy, Otogi Productions was the only other anime studio making animation for TV. By December 1963, this had grown to 5 studios in Tokyo and 5 more animated series on TV. Astro Boy's TV success also saw newfound interest in merchandising these works too. Very soon after Astro Boy aired in Japan, Tezuka was approached with an offer to screen it in America. Tezuka would then travel across the Pacific for the first time to sign contracts with America's NBC network, with Astro Boy airing in the summer of 1963. Although heavily edited and redubbed by American producers, Tezuka was delighted to have this series screened in the land of Disney. In 1964, Tezuka would again get the chance to go abroad to New York's World Fair, the personal highlight of this trip being a brief encounter with his idol, Walt Disney. Although only lasting a few seconds, Tezuka told his idol that he was a fan since childhood, and that he was the creator of Astro Boy. Disney later remarked that he knew of and admired Astro Boy and would like to make something similar himself one day. The success of Astro Boy allowed Tezuka to realize his dream of making animation and build Mushi Productions into a proper studio that would go on to produce works based off of his manga. Colored programs like Jungle Emperor, as well as experimental mixed media works like Vampires. Many of Tezuka's manga following this were adapted into anime. These adaptations worked symbiotically with their source material to boost their readership. Princess Knight was one such work. Already a successful work with its previous 1953 adaptation, it would rise to even greater heights with the success of its 1967 anime. Long before a child is born, a decision must be made. If a child is to ingest a boy heart, it will be born a boy. If a child is to ingest a girl heart, it will be born a girl. Due to a mix-up by the angel Tink, the baby that would be called Sapphire is given both a boy heart and a girl heart. As a result, Princess Sapphire is born with the appearance of a girl but the constitution of a boy. This is further complicated by a mix-up at the announcement of her birth. Inappropriately announcing his child as a son, the king must now double down on this decision, as only a male heir can inherit the throne. Should Sapphire's gender be revealed, the throne would instead go to the evil Duke Doraemon and his son. As a result, Princess Sapphire must now live the rest of her life as a prince, relying on the strength of her boy heart to foil plans trying to reveal her identity as a princess. What follows is a fairy tale adventure filled with opportunists attempting to benefit from Sapphire's extra heart, and a romance complicated as Sapphire presents as a male. Princess Knight built on the gender fluidity first seen in Metropolis, gender identity being very prevalent throughout Princess Knight. Sapphire suffering from an internal struggle between wanting to outwardly pursue her life as a young girl, yet being unable to do so for the sake of her country. She's only truly able to be herself by putting on a wig and wearing a disguise. In addition to Metropolis, Princess Knight's gender fluidity was influenced by the time it was written in. In post-war Japan, there was increasing discussions on what women's roles were in society. During the war, women were given more independence, working in factories for example. When the men returned from the war, women rejected the ideas of being forced back inside the home. This climate birthed Princess Knight, a story about a woman trying to break free from a gender identity pushed upon her. Much like the father of manga, Princess Knight, in the many years since its release, has come to be mythologized too, this time as the first shoujo manga. Princess Knight is not the first shoujo manga. The 1953 edition of Princess Knight was serialized in the girls' magazine Shoujo Club, a magazine that began in 1923. Although not the first shoujo manga, Princess Knight's importance to the shoujo landscape should not be understated. Princess Knight was to shoujo what New Treasure Island and Lost World were to shonen. Despite story manga having been established with the aforementioned works, shoujo manga were still lagging behind and, like shonen pre-Tezuka, dominated by gag manga. Princess Knight, with its complex fairy tale narrative, its strong female lead, and most importantly its success, started a revolution in the types of stories that were being told for young girls. It established elements that would later become a staple of shoujo manga, such as androgynous main characters, heroines with large eyes, and a romanticized foreign setting. Princess Sapphire specifically served as influence for Oscar from The Rose of Versailles, Lieutenant Tenjo from Revolutionary Girl Utena, and Sailor Uranus from Sailor Moon. Princess Knight is one of Tezuka's most important works, up there with Astro Boy and Jungle Emperor, however not one of my favourites. With a great first half, Princess Knight suffers in the second half from Tezuka's ambitious nature. Following the defeat of the story's main protagonist, the story is artificially prolonged past its natural endpoint, dragging its feet towards the finish line. In 1945, the Nazis were planning on developing 3 weapons in the hopes of turning the tides against the Allies: the Rocket Bomb V2, the Death X-Ray, and the Big X. The Big X follows a boy given a Nazi super soldier serum, turning him into a 50-foot tall anti-Nazi killing machine. Released as a tie-in to the 1965 Jungle Emperor anime, Liu Chan is a reimagining of the original Jungle Emperor manga, this time aimed at a much younger audience. Ambassador Magma is Tezuka's most well-known attempt to break into the mecha genre, and follow in the footsteps of his one-time assistant on Astro Boy, Mitsuru Yokoyama. the man widely credited with having founded the mecha genre with the manga Iron Man 28. It features titular character Magma in his fight to protect Earth from the evil alien Goa. Ambassador Magma has one of the more bizarre legacies of any Tezuka work, as a few years after its serialization concluded, Ambassador Magma was adapted into the first coloured Tokusatsu series. 3 aliens disguise themselves as a rabbit, a horse, and a duck. Striking up a friendship with a young boy, together they try to save the world from evildoers. Wonder 3 is the only manga that I read that was actually inspired by an anime. Having originally been planned as an anime to run alongside 1963's Astro Boy, Tezuka would reimagine this work as a manga after receiving a request from Weekly Shonen magazine for a new manga. In the underground catacombs of Rome, a man is killed, but not before he feeds a family of strays. After drinking ancient medicine, these 3 stray pups transform into super dogs. Indebted to the dead man, they seek out his son and help him find the treasure that his father died for, each dog trying to help the boy in their own way. Grand Dolls sees another entry into the Invasion of Earth subgenre. In this rendition, aliens have chosen to send in dolls that can transform themselves into humans. This is a work depicting the fear of those close to you being slowly replaced. In this decade, Tezuka's output was just as high as ever, as you've likely noticed by the length of this segment. However, the form that this would take was very different from the previous decade. Long-form epics, which had been a staple of the last decade, had disappeared, replaced by a mix of long serials, short story series, and a lot of one-shots. Similar to Fossil Island, these one-shots were compiled into anthologies. Some of the following anthologies are a collection of self-contained stories with similar themes. Cave In, however, is an example of an anthology that was compiled retroactively for Kodansha's complete work collection. Releasing throughout the 50s and the 60s, Cave In contained short stories exploring themes of crime, betrayal, and suffering. The titular short story is about a boy taking revenge for the murder of his father in a mineshaft. SF Fancy Free is a collection of science fiction short works released in the 60s, spanning from 1963 to 1970. Another science fiction compilation, Under the Air, is the first true anthology included here. Its name coming from its thematic exploration of humans struggling on the surface of the earth beneath the sky. Many of its stories feature aspects of human civilization. In one such story, we see a white racist struggling to live with himself after his life is saved from a heart transplant received from a black man. The remaining short stories in this section, including this one, are all Gekiga works. Clockwork Apple is a retrospective compilation like SF Fancy Free and Cave In, this time named after one of the stories within it. In its titular work, inhabitants of the city of Inaba are being slowly cut off from the rest of the world. Newspapers stop arriving, the radio stops working, those who live outside of the city stop showing up. In this mystery thriller, we watch how paranoia builds within main character Shirakawa, as he seems to be the only one to notice what's going on. The title Clockwork Apple is meant to refer to the idea that something on the surface appears normal but is different on the inside. This title and concept being repurposed from the novel A Clockwork Orange. The remaining short stories in this anthology are somewhat similar in their bleak tone. This final anthology examines the human condition. As explained in its opening chapter, no two human souls are exactly alike. As such, there are a possible 5 billion stories that can be told that focus on the human heart. Stories included in this work range from horror to suspense to mystery to science fiction, but they all continue the exploration of the human condition. In my opinion, any of these last 3 anthologies are a great entry point into Tezuka's Gekiga works. As each entry is self-contained, you can easily pick one up and finish it in one sitting quite comfortably. We now enter a major turning point in Tezuka's career. Works from here begin to resemble less what came before. In hindsight, they were foreshadowing Tezuka's upcoming exploration of more adult work. Published in the same magazine as Ranma Half and Fruit and Beyond the Adventure's End. A boy by the name of Tope arrives at Mushi Productions looking for work. Unbeknownst to Tezuka, he holds a secret. When the moonlight lights up the sky, Tope transforms from man to wolf. Despite its title, the human-beast hybrids and vampires have little in common with their contemporary counterparts. Instead, this series co-opts the name to explore the dark depths of humanity. These creatures, named vampires because they are humans still in touch with their bestial side. Vampires hypothesizes that rules and morals are what separate man from beast, but questions if we would be better off without them. Vampires in this work exist as human-beast hybrids, who when transformed are free from the morals of man. It is within this setting that Black Rock, the alter ego of boy detective Rock Holmes, makes his first appearance. Black Rock is identified by his possession of black sunglasses and an insistence on cross-dressing at every opportunity that he gets. The narrative significance placed on inappropriately used eye protection should not subtract from the cruelty of his actions. As Makobe Rokuro, he assumes the role of primary antagonist in Vampires, using his lack of a moral conscience to commit crimes, included but not limited to blackmail, impersonation, kidnap and murder. Tezuka was influenced by Macbeth's shift from hero to villain in his creation of Makobe Rokuro, his good boy turned bad boy villain. He parallels his namesake in his prophesized greatness, his use of underhanded schemes, his ambition, and his guilt in causing the death of his friend. His cruel actions, however, are contrasted by his charming personality and the tragedy of his origins. At times I found myself unknowingly drawn to Makobe Rokuro, much like Tope and the other vampires. Although human, Black Rock's cruelty and lack of inhibition sees him earn the favour of a radical party within the vampires. Forced to hide for much of history, a faction of the vampire tribe have begun to initiate a plan to take over the world and bring vampires out of the shadows. Using their favour, Rokuro plans to usurp their plan and position himself as king of the world. Black Rock was the first really compelling villain of Tezuka's work so far. Up until now, they had been mainly one-dimensional obstacles for the protagonist to overcome. However, Black Rock's increased agency, sympathetic backstory, and charming personality made him an instant favourite of mine. This story, looking at how man would behave when disinhibited, necessitated a darker protagonist, but this would be far from the last appearance of Black Rock, who would become one of Tezuka's most iconic recurring characters. Rock's reinvention in Tezuka's star system parallels that of many Hollywood actors. As a result, we would begin to see characters with darker, more tragic backstories coming to be the norm in Tezuka's work. Vampires is also notable for its experimental 1969 adaptation. Pushing the boundaries of animation, it used a mixed media approach consisting of live-action sets and animated characters. Though a cult classic, Tezuka did not achieve immediate success with his darker approach to his stories. In fact, Black Rock's transformation was not positively received by older fans of Tezuka's works. Tezuka would, however, begin to see more success with this next work, its 1969 anime series, and its later 2019 remake. For his ambition, Lord Daigo sacrifices his newborn child to 48 demons, each demon taking one body part from the newborn, leaving it disfigured, but not dead. The cruelty of this situation forever immortalized in my mind with the imagery of a faceless baby crawling with no limbs. Miraculously surviving to adulthood, the child, now a man, wanders Japan trying to reclaim his body parts. Dororo is the second of my 7 favourite mangas in this video. I found myself immediately captivated by the violence of Dororo's world. Panels split through the sheer force of his swing, body parts flying all over the place, art obscured by the blood spatter of unsuspecting victims, a man with his face melted off by a yokai. All of this violence, though, is just a symptom of the world this story takes place in. Similarly to Castle of the Dawn, Dororo is set in a period of Japanese history filled with war. Key to understanding this world is the yokai and their place within it. In the different roles that yokai play in the story, we get a feel for the desperation that these times call for. Hyakimaru's birth father, Lord Daigo, uses the yokai to consolidate his power. Contrastingly, a village of peasants is forced to rely on a yokai for survival, protecting it and allowing it to take unsuspecting victims. The likes of Lord Daigo are too busy warring against each other to care for the problem of those who live on their land. I am no stranger to a story about a man on the fringes of society hunting for monsters in a world at war with itself where innocent bystanders are caught in between. I'm in fact in a long-term relationship with such a story. I would actually go so far as to say that this story, The Witcher, is essential reading to truly appreciate Dororo. Book 2, Times of Contempt, illustrates the infectious hatred brought on by war, while Book 3, Baptism of Fire, illustrates the inhumane damage caused by war. The lands in the aftermath of the conflict with Nilfgaard litter with carcasses and the remains of what used to be life. Both Geralt and Hyakimaru are removed from the war, each having their own respective goals, and so pass through their respective worlds as outsiders. As outsiders, they act as the perfect vehicle for the audience to explore this world, such as its relationship between its nobility and peasant classes. With a set of narrative conventions that I already loved, Dororo had the makings of what I thought would be my favourite manga by Tezuka. Its only real fault being it remains unfinished. Published in Weekly Shonen Sunday, Dororo was intended to be a more uplifting story about children fighting back against crimes committed by their families. The bright-eyed Dororo is one such example. Orphaned following a well-intended, though poorly misplaced revolt against the ruling class by her father, she must complete her father's dream by finding the treasure that he left behind and using it to help the people of the land. Originally intended as the focus of the manga, the popularity of Hyakimaru saw the story become a lot darker than Tezuka had originally intended. In a shock twist, my favourite part of Dororo, his exploration of the realities of living in the War and States period, was part of what drove Tezuka to quit drawing Dororo. Tezuka felt that its realistic depictions of war were too much for a shonen manga, and when he was given an opportunity to start serialization on a new series, Tezuka's enthusiasm for writing dropped to zero. With the permission of his editor, Tezuka suspended the publication of Dororo, leaving it with no real ending. There was some silver lining as on its 50th anniversary in 2019, Dororo would receive another adaptation, bringing the story to a new audience long after Tezuka's passing. One day a strange moon appears. Shortly after, Taku Nakajo's father was told to take his family and relocate to a mysterious cabin. Here they are met by two men with mysterious powers before being transported 5 million years into the past to the moon. The King of the Moon, Norman, has been bringing people with special powers from all of space and time to help defeat his enemies, the Gerudan. Soon after he arrives, Taku manifests the power of telekinesis, thus begins his life as a soldier forcefully drafted into the moon's war effort against the Gerudans. Norman was meant to be Tezuka's response to the increasingly sexual and more graphic manga during the 60s. Its science fiction setting was a return to the Tezuka of old, but with newfound mastery of his craft. Though not reaching the same narrative heights as works like Kimba, Norman was an exercise in pure visual spectacle. Tezuka's awe-inspiring depictions of futuristic megastructures fully realizing its sci-fi setting. Yet still, Norman failed spectacularly in fighting against this movement, his only noticeable legacy being this was the work that Dororo was cancelled for. Norman's failure all but ended Tezuka's fight against the status quo. In works such as Vampires and Dororo, Tezuka had already began struggling to maintain his optimistic approach to storytelling, and when Shogakukan approached Tezuka to create a Gekiga manga for their new magazine's Big Comic, Tezuka succumbed to the shift of the times and created two works, Under the Air and Swallowing the Earth. 7 sisters approach their dying mother, promising to take revenge on the world. They swear an oath to love no man and hold all men in contempt. Years earlier in the battle for Guadalcanal, 2 Japanese soldiers watch a dying prisoner call out to a woman named Zephyrus. Witnessing an image of the woman, the 2 men are driven completely mad. 20 years into the future, when a girl identical to Zephyrus appears in a nearby hotel, they send Gohomatsu Seki to investigate. In the same month that Swallowing the Earth began serializing, Martin Luther King was assassinated. 1 year after its conclusion was the Ampo protests of 1970. That same year, the Japanese women's liberation movement arose in response to attempts to remove their legal right to abortion. Following the war, women's autonomy had grown, and during the 1960s the number of women in the workplace had increased, but discrimination was still prevalent. Practices such as automatic retirement for married women and unmarried women past the age of 30 was the norm until 1966. Swallowing the Earth absorbed these influences into its story about 7 beautiful sisters trying to destroy the world of men. As Tezuka's first Gekiga work, he shifted to a more realistic and provocative art style. Swallowing the Earth features explicit depictions of sex and nudity unseen until now in Tezuka's work. Sexuality is key to Zephyrus' plan to destroy the Earth. With her spite for men, Zephyrus wields her sexuality as a weapon to puppet powerful men into advancing her plans. Zephyrus is really fascinating reimagining the femme fatale character archetype, and her origins are equally as good as they are tragic. She's matched only in intrigue by comedic relief and raging alcoholic Gohon Matsuseki, his honest and aloof personality making an unlikely foil for Zephyrus. Tezuka, no longer limiting himself to children's manga, would use his newfound freedom to tell some of the most unique works in this entire video. Adult gag manga following titular character and 20-something-year-old virgin, Fusuke. Each chapter features a self-contained story creating absurdity from relatable moments of adult life. For example, Women Who Howl at Night is about the struggles of a sexually demanding partner. In Fusuke's absurdity, this is presented as women whose sexual appetite increases to a cannibalistic degree when the full moon is out. In No Deposit, struggling to afford a house in the costly housing market, Fusuke settles for a cheap yet haunted house which also doubles as a controlling ex-girlfriend. In The Idiot's Guide to Sex Fortune Telling, Fusuke finally loses his virginity. Every time his wife climaxes, she now imparts a fortune that always comes true. This blessing soon turns into a curse as Fusuke cannot make any decisions in life without first consulting his wife. Though the examples I've included here are sexually explicit in nature, that is not the case for all of these stories. This same absurd approach is also used for comedic effect in stories about lazy co-workers or being alone at Christmas. When comparing this work to Diary of Ma-chan, the first manga included in this video, it really shows how far Tezuka has come. As a gag manga, I found it thoroughly hilarious, though with a hint of disappointment that Tezuka did not create more works like it. I still have my fingers crossed that Rally Up Mankind will get some form of translation in the future. Although beginning this decade with success, it didn't end the same way. Initially optimistic and full of fight, Tezuka would soon compromise and begin making Gekiga works himself. Tezuka also would face great difficulty in the animation department. Although rising to great heights with Mushi Productions, towards the end of the 1960s, Mushi Productions became encumbered by financial and administrative problems. The boom in TV animation that Tezuka had kick-started meant that it was difficult to hire and keep staff. The cost structure that he had pioneered also meant that it was hard for companies to stay afloat without income from manga and merchandising sales. This threatened Mushi Productions' viability, combined with Tezuka's cyclical depression, led Tezuka to escape into his works even more deeply. This would eventually reach its peak at the beginning of the following decade, which were referred to by fans as Tezuka's dark period. At the beginning of the 70s, Tezuka had several classic manga underneath his belt, an ever-growing list of animated works, and a media and merchandising juggernaut in Astro Boy. With all this success came recognition, and in the eyes of the public, he was a major figure in pop culture, an industry leader, comic writer, artist, TV pundit, and critic. In 1971, Shueisha established an award in Tezuka's name, the Tezuka Award. Tezuka was head of its committee until his passing, wherein the role was taken by Fujio Katsuka and most recently Akira Toriyama. The Tezuka Award was awarded twice annually to promising young manga artists who made story manga. Notable winners since its inception included Takeshi Obata, Yoshihiro Togashi, and Takehiko Inoue. Following on from the previous decade, Tezuka was largely irrelevant when it came to modern manga, however not forgotten for his contribution to the medium as a whole. At the start of this decade, much like he is now, despite only being 41, Tezuka was seen as a mythical figure, a living relic, the father of manga. Though seeing success in his public life, Tezuka was still surrounded by failure in his professional one. Mushi Pro, which had begun as a passion project, was initially funded through profits from Tezuka's manga. With increasing success in the 60s, Mushi Pro had ballooned in size to 500 employees, all while Tezuka's manga career was still dwindling. To make matters worse, a lack of business savvy meant Mushi Productions had missed out on a significant proportion of revenue made from Astro Boy's merchandising. As a result, when the 70s rolled around, Mushi Pro had stopped exclusively making works based on Tezuka's manga and began animating anything deemed profitable. In 1971, Osamu Tezuka would resign as chairman of Mushi Pro, and in 1973, Mushi Pro would go bankrupt. Despite Tezuka resigning from the company 2 years before, he would end up taking all of the company's debts. His failure in his serialized and animated life sent Tezuka into a Great Depression, which was reflected in many of the works of this decade. Shogo was born from a series of affairs his mother had with a countless number of nameless men. After witnessing the union between his mother and another man, he develops a hatred for love, affection, and intimacy. Now a twisted young man, he has been admitted into a mental hospital for rehabilitation. To make matters worse, he's cursed by a goddess to be forced to fall in love for the rest of time, only for it to always end in tragedy. This manga's 6 chapters sees Shogo slowly learn the meaning of love in the multiple unique lives before then having it forcefully ripped away from him. The form these relationships take are often quite disturbing, such as the love between a Nazi soldier and a Jewish prisoner. Apollo's song fuses Tezuka's technical and storytelling mastery in the 60s with a dark edge. It is followed by Tezuka's most apathetic work. Otani Tetsu is a boy who hates humanity. Disillusioned with life, he terrorizes man with the phantom horse. Bomba is a story divided by tragedy. Similar to Shogo, Otani's life is one without love. He's bullied at school and misunderstood at home. The only person who understands him is his favourite teacher, Mizushima Reiko, but even she too meets a tragic fate. The life of Otani Tetsu is the hatred of unloved children manifest in the form of the murderous phantom terrorizing the Japanese public. Parallels Bomba, in that it focuses on a troubled teen protagonist relying on a phantom to deal with the world around them. Like Otani and Bomba, Yakipachi struggles at school and at home. He's a delinquent child coming from a single-parent household. He lives at home with a very strict father, who no doubt cares about him, but he still struggles to deal with the death of his mother. And so when his loneliness causes him to give birth to a female spirit from his soul, he does what any teenager would do. He puts her into one of his dad's sex dolls, names her Maria, and has her attend high school alongside him. In their new life together, Maria helps him overcome his loneliness. If that description did not immediately make it clear, Say Hello to Maria is one of the lighter works of Tezuka's dark period. Its high school setting and wacky adventures were a much needed breath of fresh air following Apollo's song in Bomba, but it wasn't completely removed from those stories either. Much like Apollo's song, Say Hello to Maria is another sexually explicit work. It places a particular emphasis on educating its readers on sex, and as a result does not shy away from nudity. This goal is at its most on the nose in the establishment of the BG Club, a club intended to teach students on how to properly interact with the other sex. The late 1960s, children's sex education was a heated topic of discussion in Japan. It's partly due to this that manga from that time were so explicit. Mangaka aiming to break out of taboos went to extremes, drawing scenes heavily depicting sex and violence. Harenchi Gakuen by Go Nagai, which was full of obscene scenes and nudes, opened the door to a new era in manga. Tezuka, on the other hand, had been trying to push back on this, much like he was pushing on the increased violence of Gekiga with works like Norman. Having felt that his efforts to stand up for what he believed was right were having no real impact, he began to question himself. This manga is a direct result of that, and sees Tezuka embrace the ecchi works that were so common today. Say Hello to Maria's focus on education, then, can be seen as a compromise on Tezuka's part, an attempt to make meaning out of its fan service. James Block, a handsome, successful black athlete, loses everything after being strung along by a white reporter, Susan Ross. In a poorly thought out act of revenge, he tries to run her over, but instead drives into a crowd of people. In prison, he encounters the mysterious Dr. F, who tells him two things. The first is an invisible ray that he invented, and the second is of his orphaned granddaughter. Seeing this as an opportunity, James goes to investigate the invisible ray after its release. In an attempt to make himself invisible, he ends up horribly disfigured. With his appearance forever altered, he takes on a new name. As Alabaster, he begins the life of crime, with a newfound hatred for everything beautiful, and seeks out the granddaughter of the scientist, who we later find out is similarly altered like himself. Alabaster uses his newfound power to expose the hypocrisy of all beautiful things in this world. He attempts to assert this worldview on the Doctor's granddaughter. Having been turned completely invisible by the invisible ray, Ami appeals to his perverted ideas of beauty. Corrupt her to his twisted ideology would justify the evil that he inflicts on the world. His efforts are however hindered by a beautiful FBI agent, Rock. Alabaster sees the return of Black Rock. Following on from his previous role in Vampires, he plays his darkest role as the crow-corrupt cop, Agent Rock. Rock is emblematic of Alabaster's worldview. A handsome man on the exterior, he is oh so very cruel on the inside, using his powers as an FBI agent to commit crimes under the guise of justice. Tezuka specifically received a lot of backlash for Brock's portrayal in Alabaster. Many fans were appalled at the actions of Rock in this work. Rock had gained popularity due to his mixture of good and bad traits, operating in a morally grey area. In Alabaster, however, Tezuka portrayed him as complete evil, a betrayal of his characterization in previous works. It's important to note that despite Tezuka succumbing to the times and making Gekiga, this did not suddenly grant him success in readership. Alabaster was too received poorly. This following Gekiga work presents its bleakness through a satirical worldview. 20-year-old Toshiko Tamura has just received the prestigious Akutagawa Prize for her recent novel. Amazingly, this is just one success story in a list of accomplishments spanning several fields. The same night that Toshiko Tamura wins this prize, a friend commits suicide after witnessing the win. And so begins the story of trying to unravel the mystery around how this young woman has accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. Book of Insects sees Tezuka's early love of insects repurposed for a critical work on 1970s Japan. Tezuka uses insects to caricature human society, the characters in this work having their personalities compared to insects. For example, the self-serving dung beetle or the shape-shifting butterfly. The beautiful Toshiko Tamura is blessed with the ability to instantly learn whatever she sees. Like a butterfly larva, she metamorphoses into a new form, actor, designer, photographer, whatever is needed to rise up through the social ladder. In the wake of her achievement, she leaves behind a path of victims whose talents she appropriated. In 1970 Japan, its high economic growth was contrasted by news of indiscriminate terrorism, hostile infighting within Japanese politics, and the mess that was the Vietnam War. Reality found itself bleeded into fiction as depictions of terrorism and hostile politics were also included in this work, each caricatured by a corresponding insect. Books of Insects questions that in a world as apathetic in 1970s Japan, is it so wrong for a woman to abuse her talents to rise to the top? Tezuka would continue his critique of society, this time making use of his medical knowledge in the medical drama. A recently discovered disease sees doctors all around the world scramble to make sense of it. Monmao is a progressive disease, disfiguring patients before then killing them. Patients undergo changes in their bone structure, grow excess amounts of hair, and begin to crave raw meat. University hospital director Tatsugawara sends his junior, Kirihito, to investigate the origins of this. Initially intent on investigating for a month, Kirihito never returns to his old life. Monmao disease is the vehicle by which Tezuka attempts his critique of the medical world. Kirihito and the hospital director have contrasting opinions on the cause of Monmao. Kirihito proposing a pathogen-based theory, while the hospital director proposes a viral-based one. Hoping to leverage his virus-based theory to win the presidential election of Japan's Medical Association, the hospital director cannot allow his credibility to be ruined by Kirihito's pathogen-based theory. And so, he sends Kirihito to Inugamisawa village. Under the guise of investigation, he intends for Kirihito to contract the disease. As a result of its dual focus on the Monmao disease and the JMA elections, Ode to Kirihito cuts back and forth between Kirihito's journey and the university hospital and its director, the time spent at the hospital increasingly exposing the corruption at play. Another victim of hospital corruption, Dr. Uzume is one of the most fascinating characters in Kirihito. A former colleague, Dr. Uzume shares a bizarre relationship with Kirihito, his feelings towards him being a mixture of camaraderie and jealousy. He recognizes Kirihito as a great doctor, but Uzume resents Kirihito as he loves his fiancée. In Kirihito's absence, Dr. Uzume assumes the role of right-hand man to the hospital director, but in secret, he plans to help Kirihito's fiancée to find him and expose the director. He's extremely volatile, following moments of heroism with acts of evil. His mental instability is depicted by Tezuka in these surreal representations of his fractured mind and the weight of his burden. Fearing the media backlash that would come from employing such a doctor, the hospital director, much like he did to Kirihito, makes Uzume disappear. The developed medical world of Tokyo is presented ruthlessly, with its doctors caring more about themselves and their images than the patients and the doctors. By comparing this against rural medicine in places with little to offer, it reaffirms that a doctor's place should be helping people rather than themselves. In Kirihito's long search for self-acceptance, that much is made clear to him. In his observations of poverty and illness around the world, he finds his purpose in treating the needy away from the corruption of modern medicine. Another work of Tezuka's dark period, Ode to Kirihito is unique in its optimism derived from a place of suffering. The same cannot be said for this next work, which is a thoroughly bleak work. World War II is over and Jiro Tenga has finally been allowed to return to Japan. Although concluding, the effects of the war will continue to have a long-standing effect on both Jiro and the Tenge family. The Tenges are a family struggling to maintain their traditional lifestyle in an ever-changing post-war Japan. Having historically been a wealthy family, they've been previously allowed to own several plots of land. Following Japan's loss to the US military, several Japanese laws have been changed, including how much land an individual family can own. Their outrage at this change mirrors that of the Japanese public on having their laws and life dictated by a foreign party during the post-war period. The same sentiment combusted into the violent ample protests of 1960 and 1970, in which hundreds of thousands of Japanese citizens surrounded Japan's National Diet building. It is just one of several cases of real-life sentiments influencing the events of this manga. Our formal introduction to the Tengeis occurs when Jiro returns back home. Here he is met by a surprise. A new addition to the family bears a striking resemblance to his sister-in-law despite supposedly being his younger sister. Here we are also introduced to Sakoemon Tenge, the head of the household. Our introduction to him sees Jiro chastised for not having died for his country, a result of the misplaced nationalism that motivated the war effort. It is also emblematic of the traditional family structure of the Tengeis. The only member with any power to stop him, Ichiro, the oldest son, enables his father's actions as he hopes to one day inherit his position. The failings of this traditional family structure will play a major role in the crimes that are to come. Sakoemon's chastisement of Jiro, though, are seemingly justified when Jiro is revealed to be an informant for the Americans, having agreed to this in exchange for being released as a prisoner of war. This role puts him at odds with his younger sister, Naoko, who during the war has become a member of the Socialist Party. Their relationship as brother and sister is strained when Jiro becomes involved in a plot to murder another Socialist Party member. This involvement is later discovered by the youngest member of the family, forcing the family to take drastic actions to maintain their image. Lacking the strength of mind to kill their youngest, the Tenge subject her to a fate worse than death. In a cruel twist of fate, the family member least responsible is the one punished. Born from the loss of Sakoemon Tenge, punished by Ichiro Tenge, victimized for the crimes of Jiro Tenge, overlooked by Naoko Tenge, the 4-year-old is to be kept out of sight, locked inside the Tenge's basement until she draws her last breath. Ayako is a tale of post-war Japan, as told through an exceedingly dysfunctional family. As a traditional family, the Tengeis are perfectly placed to explore the change that occurred in a post-war Japan. Over the course of several decades, we watch as the family slowly drifts apart, failing to adapt to the modernization that was forced onto Japan in the post-war. The American occupation government and the rise of social activism serving to crack apart the traditional Japanese family structure. The Tengeis become even more interesting when you consider their youngest member as an allegory for the suffering of the Japanese people. She is innocent despite her scandalous origins and suffers for the crimes of her family. Like much of the Japanese people, blameless for their crimes of their government in the war, is still suffering as a result. This is especially the case for the children at that time, children like Tezuka, who was only 10 years old when the war broke out, and yet suffered during the wartime and after under United States occupation. In what is almost an act of defiance, Ayako continues to prosper despite her impossible situation, much like a post-war Japan that rose from literal ruins to prosper as a global superpower. I felt Ayako to be the darkest Tezuka work because of how grounded it was. The imprisonment of Ayako, justified through this human need for self-preservation, felt painfully real. It terrified me even more so than the cruelty of Shogo and the mass murder of Otani. It is the difference between a genocide of 60 billion and the domestic abuse of 1. Ayako is endlessly fascinating, and I love trying to wrestle with its themes in my head. I call it one of my favourites, and I mean that sincerely, but I struggle to imagine myself rereading it anytime soon, only because of how hopeless so much of it felt. At this point of my read-through, I couldn't help feeling a little emotionally exhausted. It was an initially appealing offer when I started on reading works from the 70s, these darker, deeper stories, but I soon found myself missing the simple and hopeful works of decades gone by. When her mother suddenly dies, both Melmo and her younger brother Totu are left orphaned. As a final present before passing on, Melmo's mother gets her a bottle of magical sweets. A blue sweet will turn her into an adult, while a red sweet will make her young again. Melmo's kind-hearted nature sees her use these magic sweets to help the people around her and solve problems she encounters in her day-to-day life. Published in a first-grader magazine, Marvelous Melmo sees Tezuka return to making lighthearted stories. Melmo was authored to celebrate the establishment of Tezuka Productions and had always been planned to be adapted into an anime. In so doing, it became the first TV anime produced by Tezuka Productions. 100 Tales is a reimagining of the classic literature work Faust, and the second of Tezuka's 3 attempts at this classic. His original Faust manga released back in 1950 and was a straightforward adaptation of Ghost Faust, itself based on a German folk legend. Ghost Faust is a classic still largely relevant today, existing as the namesake for the trope Faustian bargain. The narrative trope in which a character makes a bargain with a devil, resulting in some unforeseen negative outcome. 100 Tales is the second attempt in repurposing Ghost Faust to the same narrative end goal. The samurai Henry promising his soul to the demon Sudama in exchange for 3 wishes. In this rendition of Faust, great emphasis is placed on Henry's character growth from a coward into a brave man. it leaves the ending of the story when his soul is taken bittersweet. Tezuka's final attempt at Faust was at the very end of his career, where he readapted Faust as a then contemporary story occurring in the mid-20th century Tokyo. Another work of Tezuka's dark period, Tezuka would immediately go on to publish Barbara after Ayako. It is inspired by the French opera The Tales of Hoffmann. In that opera, the main character Hoffmann is approached by a muse who wants him to devote himself fully to her. Barbara similarly follows the successful novelist Yosuke Mikura, who encounters a muse in Barbara, a homeless drunkard with an unknown background. Her introduction into his life marks the beginning of his mental decline as he struggles to write his next novel. Barbara is also notable as being a friend of the channel and host of the Manga podcast, Wilson's favourite Tezuka manga. Created concurrently with a TV animation project of the same name, Microid S sees Tezuka return to science fiction. Under its science fiction narrative, Microid S presents an environmental story, the invasion of Earth by sentient insects representing nature taking revenge on man. It feels like a story Tezuka would have released a decade or even two ago. It, however, separates itself from its predecessors with Tezuka's mastery of his craft, including nightmarish depictions of insects destroying the world of man. In what I am almost certain was written after Tezuka saw The Godfather, Melody of Iron is a story about a Japanese man trying to get revenge on the mob. Following his sister's marriage into the Albani family, Dan is given a warning to never betray them. Witness to the murder of another man, Dan testifies to the murder, only to later find out that the killer was a friend of the family. As a punishment, the Albani family tear off both of his arms. Developing the ability to utilize his hatred to control metal prosthetics, Dan undertakes a crusade for revenge. This semi-autobiographical short story continues Tezuka's growing focus in this decade of overtly exploring his views on the war. They are no longer hidden behind science fiction works of alien invasions or allegorical works on the struggle of Japanese people. In Paper Fortress, Tezuka just recounts what he witnessed during the Osaka bombing. A monk collapses on a mountain. He's found by a fox, a bear, and a rabbit. The fox brings berries, the bear brings fish, the rabbit brings nothing. Unable to find anything, the rabbit offers the monk the only thing that he has, his life. Throwing himself into a fire, the rabbit commits the ultimate sacrifice to save the monk. This sacrifice is told many times over during this narrative, but most fail to understand its meaning. The greater meaning of this action will not be made clear until much later in its narrative. What would later be known as India was founded by those known as the Aryan conquerors. The purest of blood from them became the leaders of society and went on to call themselves the Brahmin. Underneath them, they created social classes such as warrior, commoner, slave, and so on. They introduced discrimination that would affect Indians from before the time in which the story is told to the modern day. The people of this story, grown tired of the ways of the Brahmin, sought a savior, someone who understood the true meaning of life. Unlike Kimba, much of this biography spent focusing on other characters. Buddha begins by following Chapra, a young boy from the lowly Shudra slave caste who wants to raise his social class through deceptive means, and it follows Tata, a young thief on the Pariah clan, lower than even the slaves. Tata would continue to play a major role in the life of Buddha, even become his first disciple. Through the tragic tales of Chapra and Tata, Tezuka illustrates the inhumanity of the world that Buddha would be born into. After the events of its prologue, a young child is born under a solitary ray of light, splitting the dark heavens. This event foreshadows the role that he will play in this world going forward. Men and beasts alike gather to witness the birth of the infant Siddhartha. As the first son of King Sudahana, he lives a life of luxury and wants for nothing. Despite this luxury, he continually questions the caste system, which caused discrimination and his place at the top of it. Recognizing his apprehensions, Tata uses this opportunity to show the young prince the realities of the world. Confronted with these realities of age, disease, and death, Siddhartha struggles to understand the cruelty of this world. So at the age of 29, he becomes a monk, cutting his hair and setting off into the wild, leaving his nation, wife, and young child behind, thus beginning his journey to understand the meaning of life. On his journey, Siddhartha is met with multiple answers towards his question, but it's only through meditating under a papala tree, where through the guidance of God he finally attains enlightenment and is renamed the Enlightened One, Buddha. With the answer he seeks, he finally sets off into the world, this time to spread his teachings. Buddhist teachings take the form of ideological battles against the people he's trying to convince. Though not physically demanding, they still come with high stakes, more often than not failure resulting in Buddha's death. Buddha teaches a variety of different messages, often using parables to further emphasize his message. I'll attempt to approximate them here. All life is of equal value, regardless of caste or species. All living things suffer. Humans are not unique in this. Desire is the root of all evil in the world, and you should not want more than you need. Every creature must live according to nature. Following death is a rebirth known as reincarnation. Through these messages, Buddha deals a great blow to the caste system and finally gives us an answer to the meaning of the rabbit sacrifice. Animals are repeatedly shown throughout Buddha to be in tune with nature and the correct way to live. As such, the rabbit, understanding that all life is equal and desire nothing, voluntarily sacrifices his life to aid the monk. It is immediately apparent through reading this why Tezuka gravitated to this historical figure to make a manga on. Buddha's life contains several elements of a Tezuka story manga: the inability of people to understand each other, war, and the sanctity of nature. While not adhering strictly to Buddhist teachings, Tezuka then uses this life of Buddha to get across his central message, that all life is sacred. In a way, Buddha is the penultimate Tezuka work in that it represents everything that he stood for, only being superseded in these ideas by Phoenix. Buddha marked the beginning of the end for Tezuka's dark period. It would go on to be a huge success for Tezuka, but not immediately. In 1973, Tezuka was commissioned to write his last work, a swan song of sorts. Akita Shoten, the publishers of Weekly Shonen Champion, felt sorry for Tezuka's decline in popularity. As a celebration of his career, they commissioned him to write anything he wanted. This series was developed under the name of Osamu Tezuka's one-man theatre production, and was intended to publish 5 independent stories that would showcase many characters from Tezuka's star system. To tie these stories together, Tezuka created an original character. This original character proving so popular that his 5-week commission was extended to 5 years, the initially planned 5 chapters becoming 230. This character would then go on to have his own series. It was an episodic medical thriller following the adventures of Kuro Hazama, or as he's better known, Blackjack. Blackjack is a young Japanese surgeon, immediately recognizable by his patchwork skin, two-toned hair and black coat. His background remains a mystery, but he's world-renowned for his ability. Despite his talents, he remains infamous for practicing without a license and charging ludicrous amounts of money to treat even the poorest patients. This ambiguous morality is what separates Blackjack from the Tezuka protagonist of old. Blackjack's reputation precedes him, and he makes little attempt to deny it. His willingness to operate on any person willing to pay leads him to being directly confronted by the underworld on multiple occasions. There is no shortage of stories within Blackjack that see him kidnapped, battered, and bruised. This is not to mention on his incessant need to charge ridiculous prices for his medical work, even from the needy. Blackjack obviously wasn't completely evil like some of the characters would lead you to believe. There are plenty of stories where he charges nothing for his work. This, however, only serves to muddy Blackjack's character even more, but eventually I came to my own personal conclusion on it. Blackjack charging extortionate fees for his service are a misguided play of the worth of human life. This was made clear to me in a story where Blackjack chose to waive the fee of an operation only after a poor man is willing to sell his organs in order to pay for his wife's treatment. It's fascinating because in this situation, Blackjack behaves more like a judge than a doctor. He determines who is worthy of his treatment based on whether they meet his arbitrary bar of life appreciation. It is twisted, but fair, at least in his mind. I personally question whether stressing this poor man who's done no wrong is truly justified in and of itself. For many of his patients, I would argue that Blackjack inflicts as much psychological harm to them as he does cure them of any physical ailments. Kuro Hazama is a social outcast that would fit in with any shady character of any Gekiga manga, but he has the soft underbelly of the boy heroes of Tezuka's earlier works. Having the best of both worlds then, he was a character that resonated with older fans and new fans, and a perfect character for Tezuka to build his new dynasty with. He's partnered both in the theatre and at home by his adoptive daughter, whose name derives from Pinocchio as an artificial child made by Blackjack. She is introduced into the story through an unsuspected encounter with another patient suffering from a teratoma, a type of tumour that can be found in the human body. This tumour can include any cell type and structure. Things such as teeth and hair have been found inside them. They've been previously theorized to be formed from the incomplete absorption of a twin in utero. Tezuka adopts this theory as the basis of Pinoco's creation, following the discovery of a fully sentient teratoma containing a human brain and other functional organs. Blackjack removes it from the suffering patient and constructs the sentient tumour a fully functioning artificial body. Pinoko's construction has similarities to Dororo's artificial limbs crafted for his body by his adoptive father. Although not technically born when Blackjack crafted her body, Blackjack still adopts Pinoko as his daughter, much like Jukai did with Hyakimaru. Her childlike personality and continual assertion that she's Blackjack's wife adds much needed reprieve from the walking gloom that is Blackjack. As Tezuka's second biggest manga and taking a very similar episodic structure to his most successful manga, Astro Boy, the two are naturally compared to each other. Although lacking Astro Boy's cultural impact, Blackjack succeeded where Astro Boy failed. My issues with Astro Boy can largely be boiled down to its repetition. Diversity is Blackjack's biggest strength. Blackjack presents plenty of real conditions, rendered and treated in stunningly detailed accuracy, while including countless fictional ones too. It conveys the nobility of a job that affects something as sacred as human life, while not shying away from the dark side of medicine, criticizing medical culture and politics too. They touch on a countless number of topics relating to medical ethics, my favourite example of this being the recurrent starring counterpart to Blackjack, Dr. Kiriko. His horrifying experiences at war have led him to believe that death is a better alternative than life of living pain. Like Blackjack, he travels the world charging outrageous fees to treat his patients. The same diversity is afforded to the patients Blackjack treats as well. No two people suffering from any illness will have the same story to tell. Blackjack then makes use of its episodic structure to examine a countless number of illness narratives. One story might focus on a terminally ill author, while another might focus on a sushi maker who lost his arms in an accident. Despite both requiring surgery, neither can have the same story. The individual stories of patients take the form of parables, whereby a single chapter consistent of a medical encounter is used to emphasize a reality of the illness experience. At times these stories begin right at the start of an illness journey, sometimes in the middle, and other times at its end. By shifting where a story begins, it can be used to focus on the different phases an individual undergoes during their illness journey. At the start of the journey, we might focus on the disruption to one's life caused by a loss of health. During the middle of an illness journey, we might be forced to reckon with mortality and legacy. We can go even further past treatment to examine the difficulties that come with recovery. Through fusing this with each individual background, Blackjack creates a near endless permutation of stories only limited by the boundaries of human experience. With all this variety, consistency is then achieved through the presence of its titular character, but even this can be reduced to as little as a one-panel cameo. Blackjack is another of my favourite Tezuka works. It is a brilliant mix of what made Tezuka special at the start of his career with the fruits of his experimentation in the 60s and 70s. It is another great work to begin your Tezuka journey with. Its episodic nature is easy to pick up and put down, while also being an introduction into the format that catapulted his career with Astro Boy. I'd particularly recommend Volume 6, Chapter 1, Downpour, if you're just looking for one chapter to try out. Blackjack is also a great introduction into the star system as well for any budding Tezuka files. It features the return of many characters of Tezuka's star system, which had become scarce following his switch to Gekiga. Characters such as Rock and Mustachio make several appearances, while Hyakimaru's adoptive father shows up as Blackjack's teacher. It includes almost every Tezuka star, at least in one story, continuing its initial conception as a celebration of Tezuka's career. For this reason, Blackjack is an even greater work to read at the end of your Tezuka journey, and I know I personally enjoyed reliving the memories of earlier stars and works through their roles in Blackjack. Blackjack was one of two Tezuka works that I was personally familiar with before starting this epic journey. The first being Astro Boy, not because of any anime or manga, but because I watched its 2009 remake in my youth. The 2004 Blackjack anime was also one of the first anime I ever watched on Crunchyroll. In my initial foray into anime, I would just watch whatever, and although a bit put off by its character designs, I chose to watch Blackjack after reading its synopsis. I want to take a moment to preface that I don't dislike the Blackjack art style anymore. I actually think that it gives Tezuka's work like a lot of personality. I was just young and stupid, and I'm only one of those things now. I was pleasantly surprised when I watched, though never finished, its 60-odd episodes. Revisiting these characters again in manga form was nostalgic for these reasons. It did not disappoint as Tezuka's second largest work. Selling over 50 million copies, Blackjack put Tezuka back at the top of the manga charts and at the forefront of cutting-edge manga. this newfound success bringing with it the end of Tezuka's dark period. Our story opens up with the kidnap, ransom, and subsequent murder of a child, the culprit of which is protected by a priest escaping into the night. Michio Yuki leads a double life. In his public life, he is a respectable banker. In his private life, a cold-blooded serial killer. Although a villain, he is first of all a Tezuka protagonist. As a protagonist of a Tezuka manga, he builds on the lineage of androgynous characters previously seen in Michi, Princess Sapphire, and Black Rock. Having come from a family of kabuki play actors, Yuki is characterized by his effeminate mannerisms and soft features. He makes use of his theatrical upbringing to disguise himself in his crimes and seduce his unwilling accomplice. Yuki's relationship with the priest is at the core of this manga. More than just an accomplice, Yuki is shown to truly care about Father Garai, evident in his joy when he sees him and in his jealousy when Father Garai is seen around other women. More than just a victim, Father Garai continues to pursue Yuki despite his performative rejection of Yuki's advances. Within the muddied emotions of personal culpability and religious obligation, he wants to save Yuki from himself and put an end to his crimes. Initially presented in a sympathetic light, events later in the story cause you to question who the victim is and who the aggressor is in this relationship. Michio Yuki builds on the lineage of androgynous characters, solidifying them as an explicitly queer character. Both this sexuality and Yuki's actions in the modern day are explained in a flashback revealed later. 15 years ago, both Father Garai and Michio Yuki had been on Okinomabune Island. This island stored a remnant of the war. Following an unforeseen leak of the chemical weapon, all residents of the island are killed, and Michio Yuki is transformed from innocent child to a raging psychopath. Similar to Ayako, MW is a critique of the war and its immediate aftermath. Yuki's actions are the evils of the war coming back to haunt the people of today. Many, but not all of the people that Yuki kills, are related to the cover-up of the MW chemical weapon. This weapon, much like Ayako, can also be interpreted as an allegory, not for Japan, but for the war. Try as they might to forget about it, the lingering effects of the war are still felt on the Japanese people years after it had ended. Although set after Tezuka's dark period and well into the newfound success brought on by Blackjack, MW shares a lot of similarities with the previously mentioned works of Tezuka's dark period, even sharing the same magazine as Ode to Kirihito and Ayako. Though over his dark period, Tezuka continued to embrace darker stories, incorporating them into his narrative catalogue. For the remainder of his career, Tezuka would write works aimed at young boys, adults, and young girls. In 1976, Tezuka flew to Los Angeles to see the new studio Sanrio, the creators of Hello Kitty. At the same time he visited, Sanrio was planning to release a shoujo magazine called Lyrica and took the opportunity to request a manga from Tezuka. Tezuka, suddenly struck by inspiration, quickly sketched out the image of a little unicorn. Unicorns are magical creatures that exist to make people happy. Their magical powers stemming from friendship. They are most often seen with those who are pure of heart. Whoever they befriend is promised a life of eternal happiness. Unico's prologue begins with a titular main character who has befriended the most beautiful woman in Greece, Psyche. Lady Venus, jealous of the attention that Psyche is receiving, crafts a sinister plan to remove Unico from her side. Her plans succeed, and Lady Venus calls on Zephyrus, the spirit of the wind, to carry away young Unico away from Greece forever. The remainder of Unico's serialization sees the young unicorn travel to locations and times far removed from where the story began. Each time the young unicorn arrives at a new location, he's left with no memories of his past. Forced to make new friends in each setting, only to be whisked away by the spirit of the wind, he is cursed to repeat this cycle endlessly. This idea of a mythical being moved through both time and space to help humans is very reminiscent of the concurrently releasing Phoenix. Although a children's manga, Tezuka would use these cycles to subtly explore difficult issues such as interracial marriage, animal cruelty, and environmentalism. Unico was both positively received by readers for its quality and Sanrio for matching the Hello Kitty brand as they had intended. It is however bittersweet as the manga ends without its main character ever breaking the curse of Lady Venus. This time aimed at adults is Mountain of Fire. Another anthology like those of the 60s, its self-contained stories are notably lengthy. I want to take a moment to talk about its titular work. This is a manga of two names, The Thief, Akikazu Inoue, and Mountain of Fire. Both titles refer to its main characters. Akikazu Inoue is a wanderer relying on theft in order to survive. After stumbling into the town of Sobetsu, he meets Masao Mimatsu. Masao is an elderly postmaster possessed by Showa Shinzen, the Mountain of Fire. In awe of its beauty, he dedicates the remainder of his life into studying and protecting this mountain, going so far as to sell his house to buy the rights to the mountain itself. His passion leaves a strong impression on Akikazu Inoue, reforming him into a hard-working member of the village. Mountain of Fire is another biography in the vein of Buddha. It focuses on the true story of Masao Mimatsu and his fight to get to the volcano Showa Shinzen, recognized as a natural treasure. Like most of Tezuka's historical works, it is semi-biographical. In this work, the secondary main character, Akikazu Inoue, is completely fictional. His presence meant to emphasize the greatness of Masao Mimatsu. During the creation of this manga, Tezuka actually visited Showa Shinzen, which had recently erupted. He was struck by the chaos brought on by its eruption, streets littered with ash. This feeling was only heightened when, as he prepared to leave, it later erupted again. This time, in the midst of fear and terror, Tezuka was awestruck again, but this time by the beauty of the natural phenomenon. Tezuka presents this same duality in his terrifyingly beautiful renders of the volcano's eruption. Mountain of Fire, or The Thief Akikazu Inoue, is a moving story of how one man's life was changed by a mountain of fire, and is an ode to the man who dedicated his life to protecting that same mountain. With so many great works this decade and in decades before, it's very easy to forget that Tezuka had a life outside of manga. For example, in Astro Boy's 16-year run, Tezuka went from a single bachelor to a married man with 3 kids. The final manga in this decade highlights Tezuka's life away from manga, as seen through the eyes of his 3 children, Mako, Rumi, and Chi. It's a light-hearted work following the struggles and joys of a young family. It covers the time from the birth of Tezuka's first child Makoto, his second child Rumiko, and his last child Chiko. Within the childish tantrums of Makoto and Rumiko, and the petty arguments of married life, I found myself feeling privileged to witness something so human. It was a reminder that behind all these titles was just another person, just like you and I. In 1977, after 2 years of discussion, Kodansha began work on the publication of a 400-volume anthology of the complete works of Osamu Tezuka. Tezuka was initially hesitant as he believed his older works would never sell, but was eventually convinced by Kodansha. There were major obstacles in fulfilling this task, least of which would be in its size. Original art from some works had become lost or in poor condition. Early copies were badly reproduced or in low quality paper. Series published in magazines had advertisements on the same page as the art. Tezuka's team set out on retouching lost or damaged pages, while Tezuka went on to redraw pages and amend dialogue and story structure to make these serials flow more smoothly and fit this anthology format. New Treasure Island was one such work that was radically altered as a result of this, with both its original version and completed work versions actually existing today as 2 separate entities. With the completion of Kodansha's complete collection, Tezuka's legacy was safeguarded for future generations like me to read. Despite the collapse of Mushi production and the new challenges of an ever-changing manga market, Tezuka had finally re-established himself as a leading force in the entertainment medium, and by the dawn of the 80s, he was full of energy and optimism. In the final decade of this video, we shall explore the final works of Tezuka's career. In the 1980s, interest in Japanese culture began to grow outside of Japan. In response to this, Japan Foundation asked Tezuka to act as an ambassador, speaking overseas about Japanese comic culture. He began with a lecture at the United Nations headquarters in New York, later traveling to universities in Princeton, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Tezuka was fond of traveling and encouraged other mangaka to participate. Tezuka had encouraged Monkey Punch, creator of Lupin III, to attend the 1979 Comic-Con. He returned to Japan speaking favorably about the experience, and as a result, about 30 Japanese creators attended the 1980 Comic-Con, the same Comic-Con that Tezuka would win the Inkpot Award for Phoenix 2772. Throughout all of this, Tezuka was still making manga. Long-term friend and writer Frederick L. Scott often saw Tezuka go to his hotel room after long days, drawing pages to be shipped back to Japan. Just as Tezuka travelled abroad though, he was also visited in Japan by other creatives. In 1988, he was the host of Star Wars creator George Lucas and Robert Zemeckis, director of Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. As a consequence of all of this, Tezuka's output decreased. The 1980s is the second shortest decade in Tezuka's career after the 40s. One of Tezuka's many talks of the 1980s was held at a medical school, during which a medical researcher in the audience later contacted Tezuka, sending him some documents on his family history. It revealed that Tezuka was part of a medical dynasty, Both his great-great-great-grandfather, Ryosen Tezuka, and great-great-grandfather, Ryoen Tezuka, were both medical doctors. Ryoen was considered as the first modern military doctor in Japan and was greatly involved in introducing Western medical knowledge to Japan. These findings inspired Tezuka to create a period-piece medical drama on the life of his great-great-grandfather. Our story begins in 1855 as we are introduced to the setting of the Hill of 300 and the traditional governing structure still at play at this time. This is just the first of several detailed expository narrations on the time period. It is a signal of this work's intent to entertain and educate. It is set during the fall of the shogunate and the rise of the Meiji era. Historically, this shift coincided with Japan's change from an isolationist feudal society to a modern industrialized nation influenced by Western thinking. This turbulent time is marked by its many different factions, each trying to bring Japan into a new age in their own way. The Western doctors of Japan struggled to establish a vaccination center against the threat of traditional doctors and local superstitions. With the rising threat of foreign invasion, there is a growing sentiment to reform Japan within the government. Much like Mountain and Fire, Tezuka uses the semi-biographical structure, placing our main characters in the midst of real historical events, while including elements of fiction to emphasize the story he wants to tell. Change. The Tezukas and Tree and the Sun are Dutch-style medical doctors, named as such because their medical knowledge is derived from Dutch textbooks. They use a Western approach towards medicine. Ryosen, father of Ryoen, seeks to educate the public on the importance of vaccines and ultimately establish a vaccination center. They find themselves in opposition to the traditional doctors of the time who use a Chinese approach towards medicine, relying on herbal remedies to treat their patients. Their conflict is not only ideological, but also political. As the official doctors of the shogunate, the traditionalist doctors use their influence to delegitimize the Dutch doctors and repeatedly foil their attempts to establish a vaccine center in Edo. This anti-vaccine and anti-Dutch sentiment is not unique to the Chinese traditionalists. It is a symptom of a much larger issue: ignorance. Several untrue rumors, such as vaccines turning people into cows, have made the people skeptical and others violent. Ryoen, hoping to further his knowledge and help his father's cause, moves to Osaka to join Tekijuku Medical School and educate himself in Dutch medicine. Although inspired by Tezuka's family documents, Tree and the Sun follows two protagonists, one of which is not a Tezuka. A singular protagonist would only allow Tezuka to explore half of this turbulent time. For Tree and the Sun's exploration of change within the Japanese government, Tezuka used the honest samurai Manjiro Ibuya. Another resident of the Hill of 300, Manjiro Ibuya is the only son of a samurai family. He's the lowest ranked vassal of the daimyo Matsudaira, his salary in rice 15 hyo and 2 fuchi. Though sharing a spotlight with Ryo and Tezuka, Manjiro Ibuya is the complete opposite. Unlike the Tezukas, the Ibuyas are far more traditional, trying their hardest to maintain a lifestyle of honest servitude to their daimyo. Whereas Ryoen is a lazy womanizer, Ibuya is an honest and hardworking man. Whereas Ryoen faces the risk of expulsion for spending too much time with prostitutes, Ibuya's dedication finds him rising through the ranks of samurai and befriending the powerful men. As his standing rises, he also finds himself in the midst of political conspiracy. The same qualities that got him his promotion are the same reasons for his undoing. As the story progresses, this honest nature puts him at odds with the changing times. Disgusted by the corruption in the upper echelons of governing, Ibuya proudly proclaims, "If this is Bushido, then it is better to quit being a samurai entirely." Ultimately unable to adapt to the times like Ryoen, Ibuya finds himself on the losing side of history and forgotten to time. Despite playing a major role in this version of history, protecting the Tezukas from would-be assassins or leading the newly developed Japanese infantry unit in the civil war between the ruling Tokugawa shogunate and the imperial court, Ibuya's legacy is not, and his story is lost to time. Cemented for me in this ending was the fact that no man is bigger than history. Though both Ibuya and Tezuka play a part in the coming of the Meiji era, a conscious choice is made during the story to not position either as pivotal segments. Regardless of all the great people they come in contact with, each story is just one small part of a much larger cascade of events that would eventually lead to how things are today. Within this work, Tezuka weaves several key historical events and locations. Locations such as the Otamagaike Vaccination Center that the Tezukas have been fighting to establish are later revealed to be the founding pillars of the modern Tokyo University. Similarly, the Tekijuku Medical School that Ryoen attended in Osaka is revealed to be the predecessors to Osaka University, where Osamu Tezuka later attained his medical degree. Tree in the Sun is a celebration of the some contribution of the people that allowed Tezuka to be. Reading this work was like an existential experience for me, whereby I began to consider my own place in history, as well as the many people who came before me that allowed for me, and yet that he'll never meet, nor ever know. This decade of Tezuka was, at least for me, defined by his historical and biographical works. We received one of Tezuka's masterpieces in Tree in the Sun, and meanwhile Buddha was still serializing. Tezuka would also release a further 2 more historical works. In 1983, when Tezuka was commissioned at the request of one of his editors for a thoroughly serious drama, Tezuka would again write another historical work, this time centering on the ancestry of. Later known as Message to Adolf, this story follows the lives of 3 men, Adolf Kammel, Adolf Kaufmann, and Adolf Hitler. Interestingly, it begins following a Japanese reporter, Sohei Toge. Originally intent on reporting on the Berlin Olympic Games, the death of his younger brother changes his plans. His investigation into the suspicious circumstances surrounding his brother's death forever changed his life. His brother was a foreign exchange student but had become involved in a communist group. During his time here, his brother had come into possession of a document, and for this crime, he was murdered. The document in question reveals the ancestry of the Führer, and its implications could have saved the lives of millions. Toge's life goal is now to publicize this document under the death of his brother. For this cause, he finds himself chased out of a home, chased out of a job, and at odds with the Japanese secret police. Adolf Kammel is a German Jewish immigrant living in Kobe, Japan. Despite Japan's involvement with Germany during World War II, the Jewish population finds themselves, relatively speaking, welcome in Japan, at least not at any risk of any harm from the Japanese populace immediately. Through his eyes, we witness how the war affects the Jewish population. Although living in safety, the Kammels feel obligated to, and do in fact, help their persecuted brothers abroad. In a show of altruism, Adolf Kammel's father leaves Japan to help his struggling brethren, leaving a still young Adolf Kammel to support both himself and his mother. Adolf Kaufmann is a half-German, half-Japanese boy who also lives in Kobe. His story is perhaps the saddest of the 3 men. As the son of a Nazi and a Japanese woman, he struggles deeply with his sense of self. Ostracized by the Japanese youths in his area despite being born and raised in Japan, his only friend is Adolf Kaufmann, a Jew, a race that his father loathes. His father's connection with the Nazis later see Adolf Kammel sent to Germany to be educated at a Nazi youth school. Here we see the innocent child radicalized into a brainwashed Nazi enforcer, his want to be Japanese now replaced with a loathing for his heritage. It's through Kaufmann's story that we see the evil the Nazis are capable of, and it's through his eyes that we get to see the Führer. Adolf Hitler's initial presentation is rather puzzling. Up until his meeting with Adolf Kaufmann, he's primarily played an indirect role in the story, his ancestry pushing the plot of Sohei Toge, and his actions creating the suffering of the Jewish people. Tezuka initially chose to depict Adolf Hitler as a charismatic leader, his powerful speeches and friendly demeanour doing much to radicalise the young Adolf Kaufmann. By the end of the story though, this image is crumbled and broken away, leaving only the ramblings of a crazy man. His previously composed demeanour now being shown to be hiding a deep insecurity underneath. It's important to know that although I've segmented all of these characters apart, but all of them are connected, and by the end of the manga they are all reunited in Japan. The reunion of Adolf Kammel and Adolf Kaufmann in particular was very difficult to read. Tezuka, having suffered a lot through the war period, writes a story sympathising with people who are anti-patriotic to the war effort. Having tactfully explored war a countless number of times in his career, Adolf is his most emphatic and explicit depiction on his thoughts. He pulls no punches and leaves little room for the imagination. In one of the most extreme examples, a young Adolf Kaufmann is forced to kill a Jewish man as a show of his loyalty to the Nazi cause. The lives of these 3 men, as told here, is used to characterize the baseless hatred that fueled the actions of these times. The histories of this work are relegated to the ends of chapters as a way of making the war feel like it's happening in the background of their story. It grounds the atrocities of these war in the relationship of 3 men. In 1986, Adolf received the 10th Kodansha Manga Prize in the adult section. Lecturing in Minneapolis at the time of its announcement, Tezuka's wife accepted the award on his behalf. She had this to say: "This prize was originally meant to encourage young authors. As one gets older and gets a prize, it can also be a great encouragement. Older colleagues, let's persevere, regardless of our years." As one of Tezuka's last great works, Adolf stands as a testament to Tezuka's continual pursuit of the development of his craft. Now, although this decade has gotten off to quite a gloomy start, quite similar to that of the dark period of the 70s, not all of the 80s was filled with doom and gloom. This following work was conceived by combining the concepts of TV stations, gremlins, and an airheaded female protagonist. A rude and talentless girl finds herself the star of Tozai Television Productions. Perplexed by this, reporter Makabe Rokuro seeks to get to the bottom of this. His investigation leading him to find out that the TV station is haunted by a trickster demon named... What follows is a mostly wacky, but at times horrifying slice of life manga, whereby the trio find themselves involved in the demon-related hijinks. Rock's inclusion in this trio is of particular interest. Say Hello to Bukila can be considered as the redemption of Rock Holmes. After playing extremely dark roles in Tezuka's dark period, Rock began to emerge from the shadows slightly, playing minor roles in Buddha and Blackjack. In Bukila, Tezuka cast him in a slapstick role to bring his transformation full circle. Tezuka would also use this decade to look back on his career in general, revisiting old characters, stories, or ideas. Rock Holmes was just one such example. Another was... A fan of the Astro Boy manga wishes that the boy cat could be real. His dreams are partly answered when his cat, named Astro for its uncanny resemblance to the Japanese icon, finds himself remade in the image of the Astro Boy. Just like the boy robot, Astro the cat uses his newfound powers to fight off evil and help those around him. Astro Cat is a meta-story about how the Astro Boy story inspires its readers. Its universe shares many similarities with our own, but the most important being the existence of Astro Boy. Although ended in 1968, Astro Boy continued to define Tezuka's career in 1986 and onwards even after his death. Even in this video, I've somehow managed to talk about Astro Boy in every single decade of this video. With its initial setup, Astro Cat positioned itself to tackle what Astro Boy meant to the Japanese people. However, as the story continued, it began to focus less on what Astro Boy meant to its fans and more on superpowered cat adventures. It could have been an interesting companion piece to the mainline series, allowing readers to see what Tezuka thought had made Astro Boy special. Regardless of its simplicity though, Astro Cat was still an enjoyable work for what it was. Similarly leaving lingering effects in his career was Blackjack. Blackjack initially had run from 1973 until 1978, and then it was later followed by 13 special issues that serialized into the 1980s, the final chapter releasing in October 1983. I've already mentioned that Blackjack was Tezuka's second most successful work, and it was actually so successful that Tezuka took another 2 attempts at the Blackjack formula. As an actor for hire and master of disguises. Like Blackjack, he is a character on the fringes of society possessing a questionable sense of morality, this time manifesting itself in his acting fees. Rainbow Parakeet, similar to Blackjack, charges exorbitant sums for his work, although he does differ from Blackjack, slightly. Whereas Blackjack is called a thief in the metaphorical sense, taking large sums of money from his unsuspecting patients, Rainbow Parakeet is quite literally a thief. He steals from his clients or clients of clients, claiming it as his acting fees. Likewise, his obsession with money coming from a twisted yet tragic worldview. He's paired by a light-hearted partner in Tamasaburo, a queer dog taught to mime as a mode of communication. Being a story about an actor, Rainbow Parakeet is another work that embodies another of Tezuka's passions, theatre. For example, in homage to Merchant of Venice, Tamasaburo signs a contract wherein if he fails to finish eating a meal at a restaurant, he will be fed to the restaurant owner's lion. Although taking much from Blackjack and infusing this with one of Tezuka's passions, Rainbow Parakeet never reached the same heights as Blackjack for me. Mainly due to its lack of variety, I found myself growing tired of Parakeet's staged robberies. As a spiritual successor to Blackjack, Parakeet is paired in this decade by another rogue in the fringes of society. Midnight possesses a rough exterior and soft core. An ex-delinquent, he now spends his nights paired by his partner, a modified muscle car running a late-night taxi service, picking up all manner of customer. Saving up every penny from this so as to pay off his girlfriend's hospital bills. Midnight, at least for me, came much closer to the greatness of Blackjack. Although the titular character, Midnight's life as a taxi driver necessitates him to play a minor role in his passengers' lives. Midnight's profession allows for a similarly broad slice of life to that of a doctor. By choosing to focus on the passengers, Midnight is not limited by a single perspective. This idea perfectly surmised at the end of every chapter. The night has a myriad of faces. I found it poetic that one of Tezuka's great passions, medicine, would become one of his most iconic works, even inspiring 2 more works similar to it. His other passions like Disney and theatre were similarly realised in his other works, like Kimba the Lion and 100 Tales. However, what is less known is that Tezuka was a big fan of classical music also. I initially became aware of this in one of Tezuka's earlier interactions with his son, Mako, from Mako Rumitachi. Tezuka, while attempting to quieten the crying infant, notices that he can manipulate the infant's screams to create melody. Using this discovery, he attempts to recreate Beethoven, only to be interrupted by his bemused wife. In March 1987, Osamu Tezuka would have the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a fan of classical music. Asked by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs to attend an international conference in France, Tezuka would make the most of this opportunity to travel to Vienna and visit the home of his favourite classical musician, even having the opportunity to play his piano. This experience was so inspiring that on his return to Japan, Tezuka immediately began working on a follow-up to the biography of Buddha, this biography centering on his idol. In 1770, in the rural German village of Bonn, a baby boy is born into a family of musicians. Named after his grandfather, Ludwig von Beethoven the Elder, it is hoped that one day he will become a great musician. With the goal of making another court musician in the family, the boy's father trains him hard from a young age. By the age of 5, he already has admirers within this local neighbourhood. Now realizing that his son is a genius, Johann Beethoven trains him harder than ever in the hopes that he may one day be regarded amongst the greats. Starting right at Beethoven's birth, Ludwig B is intent on showing Beethoven's journey from an unknown into a renowned artist. As a character, he's very reminiscent of Kimba, showing an unyielding determination towards living up to the expectations set by his family. In a scene very evocative of Jungle Emperor, at the moment of his will wavering, his grandfather returns from the grave. Parting with words of wisdom, his voice solidifies Ludwig's will to become one of the greatest. Johann, his father, similarly imparts words of wisdom onto his son. Following humiliation at the court, his father emphasizes to Ludwig the importance of not just becoming a great musician, but becoming one greater than even the nobles. In the period of time that this story is set in, musicians are reliant on nobles to make a living, these nobles often making use of this dynamic to exploit musicians into doing what they want. Even Beethoven's teacher, Mozart, is not free from this system. On his journey to greatness, Beethoven is also fighting for social change and to raise the status of musicians. The biggest obstacle to achieving these goals being Beethoven losing his hearing, cruelly inflicted on him by a cynical stranger. While reading this work, Tezuka makes clear his love for Beethoven. Tezuka chose Beethoven as the object of this biography not only because he enjoyed his music, but because Tezuka found many great similarities between the two's lives. In this afterword, Tezuka pointed out several similarities. Both had moved several times and had no fixed address, and also got married later in life. Tezuka also compared the difficulties of making music to that of making manga. In one of the more on-the-nose displays of this, a young Beethoven screams out that manga and music are in fact the same battle. Ludwig B had the makings of another of Tezuka's masterpieces, but was abruptly cancelled in its second year of serialization when Osamu Tezuka died. Towards the end of this decade, Tezuka became aware of the limits of his own body. In 1984, during the serialization of Tree and the Sun in Message to Adolf, Tezuka was hospitalized with acute hepatitis. In 1988, during the serialization of Ludwig B, he was hospitalized for 2 months following a bout of abdominal pain. He was admitted again that same year, 2 weeks after his birthday, on November 18th, never to leave. On February 9th, 1989, Osamu Tezuka passed away. His final words, "I'm begging you, let me work." A month before Tezuka's death, on January 7th, 1989, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito passed away aged 87. He was the longest serving emperor in Japanese history. His reign began in 1926, 2 years before Tezuka's birth, and continued until his death in 1989. Despite the emperor's death marking the end of the Showa era, it has been reported that the outcry at the death of Tezuka was even greater than that of the emperors. In his 43 years as a mangaka, Tezuka released countless works that had an immeasurable impact on the Japanese public. I've talked about many of them, but only one work has been referred to as his life's work. I've intentionally left it for last as this work has several parallels to Tezuka's career. It is a work concerned with birth, death, and the meaning of life. It is Tezuka's most experimental work from both a narrative and artistic level. It is the end result of 43 years of dedication to his craft. The earliest version of this work available to read was released in 1957 when Tezuka was still at the peak of his popularity. The likes of Jungle Emperor having just finished and Astro Boy and Son Goku the Monkey King still serializing. It centers around a magical bird with the ability to prolong the life of any creature by several magnitudes. Immortal in the metaphorical sense, the bird can give birth to a new life, granting that life its powers. Two lovers granted immortality by this bird struggle to reunite in multiple time periods. This was Tezuka's second attempt at this story, but neither were referred to as his life's work. 10 years after this release, Tezuka would reboot the series in 1967, this reboot coming to be known as Tezuka's masterpiece.
It is said that the one who drinks the lifeblood of this bird will never die and will live on just as she has lived, here on the vile mountain for time immemorial.
Immediately from her first introduction, the Phoenix is presented to the reader as this supernatural entity. Soaring gracefully through the sky, she is mesmerizing. She rarely interacts with man, instead choosing to stand above them. Her role in each story differs from one to another, but most often she is presented as a shepherd, guiding man in their time of need. Her countless years have given her great wisdom, with which she uses to counsel man on the truths of life.
Not fair, you say? What do humans desire? Immortality? Everlasting happiness? Nagi, look in front of you. Look at the insects.
She's an ever-present in this story spanning millennia, with each of Phoenix's 12 volumes alternating between future and the past. The first volume, Dawn, takes place between the years 240 to 270 AD. In their search for the blood of the Phoenix, the Yamatai kingdom invade and slaughter a neighboring kingdom. The Yamatai and their queen Himiko are both based on the real historical kingdom and queen of the same name. Their historical counterparts existed in the country of Wa, the earliest known name for Japan. The remaining 5 volumes of the past, Yamato, Karma, A Robe of Feathers, Civil War, Strange Beings, and Sun, similarly focus on the Japanese throughout different periods of their history. The second volume, Future, takes place in the year 3404 AD. All previous versions of the Phoenix exclusively took place in the past. This was the first work to take place in the future, as are Space, Resurrection, Nostalgia, Life, and Sun, each warn against the dangers of the future, but most importantly, the dangers of technology. This critique takes its most explicit form in following his death, a man is artificially revived, the majority of his body now being synthetic, including his brain. Since his resurrection, he's unable to perceive any living creature, instead seeing them as haunting abstractions. Juxtaposed against this is how he perceives inorganic life, and his only comfort now being a robot which he mistakes for a human girl. This artificial resurrection is contrasted against the rebirth of the Phoenix. Both the mythological Phoenix and Tezuka's Phoenix have the ability to resurrect following their death. In Tezuka's Phoenix, this is used as an allegory for life. In death and rebirth, life carries on in an endless cycle. Man's attempts to usurp this through an artificial resurrection is a perversion of the ways of nature and the reason this character is punished. Both timelines of the Phoenix, the past and the future, march in opposite directions, the past moving forwards, the future moving backwards. They had been intended to meet in the middle in contemporary Japan, forming a circle. The result should have been that the completed collection would become an interpretation on the cycle of life, and the many challenges that face humanity. However, this did not come to pass. To maintain the continuity during these parts, they were tied together by the presence of the Phoenix, and one man. Not explained until its 4th part, one man kept appearing in many of these parts, despite each part essentially being self-contained. Much like the rest of the Phoenix, this man, Saruta, is an experimental form of one of Tezuka's most frequently used techniques, his star system. Unlike previous iterations of Tezuka's star systems, Saruta poses an in-story explanation for his multiple appearances. Following his crimes in space, Saruta is cursed by the Phoenix to suffer for eternity. Each appearance he makes is not a new role, but instead another reincarnation subjected to a life of struggle. The point of their struggle made clear in the 5th part of the Phoenix. It tells the story of 2 sculptors, Gao and Akanemaru. Following an unfortunate accident, a baby is left disfigured. Continually ostracized, the one-eyed, one-armed youth, Gao, turns to a life of murder and thievery. However, a chance encounter with a high priest inspires Gao to a new purpose. Wielding his pain as a tool, he is able to imbue his sculptures with a life of their own, garnering him reverence from the people around him. Gao's story is paralleled by a Kanemaru. Losing the ability to sculpt following an attack from a young Gao, his journey sees him struggle to regain the ability to sculpt. Whereas Gao rose from a dark place to achieve serenity, a Kanemaru falls to a place of greed and obsession. Drunk on the adoration from his skills, he merely wants to be the greatest sculptor and cares little for the craft. His downfall is cemented in the making of his magnum opus, a giant Buddha statue whose foundations are rooted in labor and death. It exists solely as a piece of propaganda for the government rather than an act of true devotion to the Buddha. It is the height of perversion of the craft of sculpting. Karma begins with a karmic effect of Saruta's previous life on his new incarnation, Gao, and ends with the karmic effects of a Kanemaru's life of greed catching up to him, dying while trying to protect his life's work from a fire. In one of the Phoenix's most sparing appearances, she mentions that for his actions in this life, a Kanemaru will never again be reborn as a man. Although agnostic, Tezuka uses this Buddhist teaching to get across a universal theme. The consequences of one's actions can persist even past your own life. Although dying and leaving the Phoenix unfinished, even through his death, it persists as a testament to the significance of his career, both in its quality and in its legacy. 8 of Phoenix's 12 parts, Karma included, were published in the same magazine. Com, the cutting-edge manga magazine launched by Tezuka, showcasing avant-garde and experimental works. It began its first issue with the release of the first Phoenix part in 1967, Dawn. As such, Phoenix's legacy is deeply tied to Com. In this first issue is an opening remark by Tezuka. It is said that now is the golden age of manga, so shouldn't works of outstanding quality be published? Or isn't the real situation one in which many manga artists are being worked to death while they are forced into submission, servitude, and cooperation with the cruel requirements of commercialism? Com's purpose was to provide an opportunity for professionals to publish experimental works and to allow fans a chance to have their own works published alongside their idols. It was one of the select few non-commercial alternatives to weekly manga serialization. Many manga artists who submitted their work in the amateur section of Com went on to become successful manga artists. Artists such as Katsuhiro Otomo of Akira fame, Mitsuru Dachi of Touch fame, and Hideshi Hino, a pioneer of horror manga. Unfortunately, this altruistic purpose would be this manga's downfall. Not made with the intentions of being commercial, Com was cancelled, and with its death, it faded into obscurity, much like Tezuka's career. Tezuka's career was one of alternating highs and lows. Like the Phoenix, he rose from the ashes of post-war Japan to make a name for himself. As the times began to move past him, and as his career faded away, he rose again, this time from the ashes of irrelevancy, creating his most critically and commercially acclaimed works. Even in physical death, his karma continues on through the innumerable amount of people his works inspired, and those inspired by those works, and so on as the cycle of inspiration and creation continues. At the 1980 San Diego Comic-Con, Tezuka met a young girl who was a fan of his work. After drawing a sketch of Hyakimaru for her, she began to cry. Explaining her love for his character, it made him happy, but he recalled that the overall experience felt strange. That a young child who lived thousands of miles across the world would have been so moved at the drawing that he made that it would bring her to tears. In 2024, such a reaction as the one that occurred at the 1980 San Diego Comic-Con is a given through the many international fans of the medium today. It is a testament to how far the medium has come since Tezuka, but without him it's very possible that this medium would never have reached the heights that it has done today. Often forgotten and rarely mentioned today, I would like to send this video off by giving thanks to the man who shaped this medium that we love so much today.